Stacy, can you hear us?
Okay, we are now live.
Thank you, Mr. Eklund. I'd like to call to order this work session of the Moore County Board of Education. It is Monday, June 1st. We're beginning our meeting at 1 o'clock. I entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
This is Ed, so move.
Second, this is Betty.
Motion by Mr. Dennison, second by Dr. Brown. By roll call, Dr. Brown, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Caldwell? Okay, she's voting yes, but she can't speak. Okay. Mr. Dennison?
Aye.
Ms. Thompson?
Aye.
Ms. Wallen-Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
All right. And I also vote aye. That means the motion carries 7-0 to approve the agenda. And I see that we're having a little bit of trouble with connection with Ms. Caldwell. So she is available and will be logging back on. At this time, I'd like to take a moment for the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would simply follow with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I'd like to ask Ms. Thompson to lead us in a moment of silence.
Thank you. I would just like to ask everyone that if they would just remember the family of our dearly beloved Bobby Purvis, who passed, as well as our student deals at Robbins Elementary. Those are key losses within our Moore County School family. So if you could just remember those in your thoughts. Thank you.
All right, for the record, let me note that I have been joined by Dr. Betty Brown, Ms. Stacy Caldwell, Mr. Ed Dennison, Ms. Pam Thompson, Ms. Helena Wallen-Miller, and Mr. John Weaver, as well as Dr. Grimacy and Board Secretary Sonia Potter, and numerous other folks as we work through a very long pending action list here today. So I will go directly to Dr. Grimacy to lead us through it. Maybe. Have we lost Dr. Grimacy? Well, our first item on the agenda is the risk management, and I know we're going to Andrew Cox for that.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll go ahead and present even without Dr. Grimacy. So these are the risk management plans that will be in place for the 2020-2021 school year that are over $50,000, which is the board threshold for approval. I will be sharing or have shared those risk management plans that are under $50,000 with the board as information items outside of the board meeting. The first item you see there is property coverage, which is through the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. For the 2020 year, the cost was $118,000 based on $403 million in property valuation. Our policy runs August to August, so we'll be expecting the renewal in August 2020. As with most insurance, we expect a slight increase over that $118,000. Two things I want to note: that the DPI insurance section, based on general statute, this past year has now relocated or will be relocating to the North Carolina Department of Insurance. So our insurance going forward for property will be through the North Carolina Department of Insurance instead of North Carolina Department of Public Instruction there. The second item is our automobile and inland marine coverage, cost of $72,821 for the 2020-2021 school year, $48,000 for automobile and $24,000 for inland marine. That covers our vehicles and equipment, things like Chromebooks. It is a slight decrease from last year, and part of the reason for that decrease is the We were able to take some value from Chromebooks that are going off lease that we're now not required to have covered under this insurance. So it is a decrease for there. And the third item is our workers' compensation coverage through EMC, which Surrey Insurance is our agent. We're anticipating the cost to be about $217,116. That is an 8% increase over last year. And that is mainly due to our modifier, which is how the premium is determined, increase from 1.05 to 1.12. Our total risk management plans, which includes all our risk management coverage above 50,000 and below 50,000, will total just over $500,000, which is a 5.1% increase over the prior year. Happy to take any questions related to these coverages.
Are there questions for Mr. Cox?
This is John Weaver. Mr. Cox, the $403 million property value, does that account for the new schools that will be added during the course of the year and the sale of the surplus schools?
It does not at this point, no, sir. Once that new Aberdeen is brought on, we get the Mr. Barath can substantial completion, I think, is when they turn it over to us. We don't have to have coverage on it until that point. So DPI risk manager will come out and do an assessment, and then at that point we'll change the valuation for the new school. And then once those buildings are sold, we'll be able to remove them from that insurance premium. So that will change during the course of the year. That 403 does not include the new schools and removing the old schools.
And likewise, the sooner that we dispense of the property that we do not use, that also will have a reductive effect on our premiums.
Correct.
We don't have any idea.
Question about the Chromebooks that are going off, are being retired, so to speak. You said they go off the insurance contract. Now, I'm guessing that's because the cost of insurance is more than the actual used Chromebooks would be worth.
Well, it's the lease required them to have that additional coverage.
And it
So
is
Chromebooks, our deductible for that coverage is $250. So the valuation of the Chromebooks aren't much more than that brand new. So it's not advantageous for us to put new Chromebooks on that coverage because there's really no benefit to it because the cost is almost equal. So we had coverage based on the lease requiring us to have coverage for the Chromebooks, and that lease is ending. So we now not have coverage.
Other questions? All right, seeing none, then we'll move on. Dr. Grimacy.
We'll stick with Mr. Cox for item 2B. And Madam Chair, my apologies earlier when you referenced me and my screen went to black. As soon as you said it's time for Dr. Bob, so I've been logging back on. I do, before we go on with Mr. Cox, I just want to check real quickly with the clerk. Do we have Ms. Caldwell back among our participants yet?
I have not gotten back with her.
Yes, no, she is listed on our participants. Ms. Caldwell, can you hear us now?
Control.
Ms. Caldwell, you were on. Now you're.
Unmute.
Okay, your mute button is coming on and off. We'll just make sure we know what our technical limitations are. Okay.
Wave your hand if you can hear us, Stacy.
Yeah, I think. All right. What we'll do, Madam Chair, I'll recommend, well, we're not taking any actions today other than approving the agenda. So fortunately, that'll be the case. So Ms. Caldwell, you can just kind of let us know visually. Or do we have we have a chat box. Ms. Caldwell, what we'll do is if you would use the chat box to alert us if you have questions. If you could maybe put something in the chat box just to let us know you know how to use it. And then Mrs. Potter will rely on you to monitor that chat box and let us know. Okay, good. So,
Got it.
all right. And Ms. Potter, do you know how to monitor the chat box for us?
Yes, I've seen her response.
Okay, very good. Okay, with that, Madam Chair, we'll go to item 2B, continuing budget resolution for FY 2020-2021, and Mr. Cox. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Dr. Grimsey, Madam Chair, other members of the board. This is the continuing budget resolution for fiscal year 2020-2021. What this does, it allows us to continue operations at the current level of the May 2019-2020 budget, so we can continue operations until a state budget has been passed and we can bring back the original budget resolution for the 2020-2021 school year. It's standard procedure. And again, like I said, it just allows us to continue operations until a state budget has been passed and we can bring the original budget resolution to you, which we anticipate being in August or September. This year, it was a little later than that because we didn't truly have a state budget passed. So it'll depend on when the state budget's passed and we can bring back the original budget resolution to you. Happy to take any questions.
I believe we were still waiting for a state budget to be passed, and we might wait again. So thank you for keeping up with this for us. Are there questions?
Yes, Mr. Cox, this is Helena. My question is about the May continuation budget. Does that include any of the supplemental funding received from the state or the federal government due to COVID-19?
It does not. We had not received that information when we passed the May budget resolution. So it does not contain any of that dollar amounts. However, I'll just say these dollar amounts, once we bring our original budget resolution back to you in August or September, we will be nowhere near these budget limits. So I do not think that that will be an issue going forward.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With your permission, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mike Metcalf for item 2C.
Thank you, Dr. Grimsey, Madam Chair, members of the board. Each year, Moore County Schools reviews and updates the school standard day schedule that consists of 6 hours of actual instructional time, an 8-hour workday for staff. It also includes start times and end times each day, the beginning and end of lunch rotations, and estimated times for bus unloading and completing of route times. You'll notice several changes from last year. First, Southern Pines Primary and Southern Pines Elementary, to accommodate the calendar flexibility we provided them as they move into the new facility for the first semester. At Southern Pines Primary, they had been at 7:30 start. They'll now be a 7:22 start instructional time. That's an 8-minute change at Southern Pines Primary. And at Southern Pines Elementary, again, an 8-minute change from 7:45 to 7:37. You also note that we've included the standard day schedule for the second semester for Southern Pines. They'll start at 7:30 and the day will end at 2:38 with that additional 8 minutes throughout the course of the year. Also, Aberdeen Elementary, the new Aberdeen Elementary instructional day will begin at 7:30. That's a little bit of a change for Aberdeen Elementary. Aberdeen Primary School was at 7:30 last year, but Aberdeen Elementary was at 7:45 last year. Now will be 7:30 as a start day for instructional time. There's a few other changes too that are relatively minor. Some changes at Southern Middle School, Cranes Creek, West Pine Middle School in terms of their lunch rotation times. Pinehurst is starting breakfast about 5 minutes earlier. And the Community Learning Center, working around their buses, has changed their breakfast and lunch times as well. So some minor changes there, but the major changes at the Aberdeen and the Southern Pines schools. And we ask for your endorsement, and I'm here to answer any questions that you might have.
Mike, this is Ed. I have a question.
Yes,
Do we
sir.
have any time built in so we can bank time in case of snow days?
Yes, we do, sir. The state requires 20,050 hours. We have 25 hours, in essence, 4 days that are built in. We have 2050 in terms of what's built into the calendar. The state requires 1025. Let me start that.
Thank you.
I apologize.
Oh, that's good.
It
Thanks.
requires 1,025. We've built in 1,050. We've got 25 hours of instructional time built in, which gives us just over 4 days.
Hey, Mike, this is Stacy. I just want to make sure you guys can hear me now.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we can, man.
Okay,
All right, I'm back on.
I guess the only comment I'd like to make is that I do feel for the young people at, let's just say West Pine Middle, because I think it's the earliest one, who have to start eating lunch at 10 o'clock. Now, I know they start school early, so they'll, I'm sure, be ready to eat, but that's an early lunch time. And of course, that's indicative of the fact that our school is overcrowded and it takes that long to accommodate that many children eating in one cafeteria.
Yeah, so much of that is about space in the cafeteria, the time that takes to rotate through the cafeterias, as well as trying to protect instructional time. Teachers love those blocks of instructional time. And so that's part of that. So some of it is about scheduling as well as class sizes.
All right, other questions? All right, if there are none, then we will move on.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Metcalf and Ms. Heather Stewart.
Yes, sir. We're going to hand it over to Heather to do this presentation. Ms. Stewart, our Interim Director of Curriculum and Instruction.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair, Dr. Grimacy, other members of the board. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Fantastic. So I bring to you today a discussion around our math textbook purchase based on the math pilot implemented last year. And 4 schools implemented the math programs in elementary for K-5. At the conclusion, each school presented their strengths and weaknesses. And we want to present to you our findings and our recommendation. And so Laura's going to go ahead and thank you. So the math pilots, Cameron Elementary did investigations, Robbins Elementary did Big Ideas Math, Sandhills Farm Life Elementary Envision Mathematics, and then Vast Lakeview Elementary did guided math. And all of the programs had positives and challenges. However, one program really stood out and met all the criteria that we needed for our Moore County students. We were really looking for alignment to the standards, meeting the needs of all of our learners, thinking about a multi-tiered system of support, robust online resources, rigor and relevance, and alignment to the K-5 math frameworks. So we are recommending Big Ideas Math from Robbins Elementary. The materials were aligned to the standards. Rigor was built into the program. The materials connected to the Moore County Schools math frameworks for K-5. And all of the materials also work really well for the robust remote learning plan. It checks all the boxes compared to the other programs implemented in the pilot. Thinking about also our expectations for Moore County schools, our focus areas, we'll continue to use STAR as the universal screener to determine what students know and are able to do. Teachers will use their PLC process to plan for the core. They will look at the curriculum documents created during summer curriculum work that are aligned to Big Ideas Math. Should we be able to adopt this program to inform the what for the core? And there are pre and post assessments built into Big Ideas, as well as ongoing formative assessments. And the online component allows teachers to assign problems based on student need. So all of those will all of that will fall into our practices that we're already doing in Moore County schools. So I just wanted to make a note of that. So let me tell you a little bit more about Big Ideas. So there are the components. You have the student materials, math musicals, and other online materials, and then teacher materials. All of the materials are available for the students in hand as well as online. They're all aligned to state standards. Teachers provided feedback about all of these components and agreed that they really liked that everything was in print and available online. And that wasn't always the case for all of the math pilots. Student text and teacher editions are available in Spanish. This is especially helpful for our dual language program. Teachers were able to display the ebook during teaching. The dynamic classroom videos allow teachers to send a flip link to students. The online component features formative assessments that guide instruction and allows teachers to assign problems based on that data that can be graded or just moving toward standards. This also provides immediate feedback for the teacher about student learning. There's also a skills trainer that reinforces skills previously taught and shows when some students need more practice or enrichment at the higher level skills. There's online games. Favorite part about it, the online games are support for students when they aren't answering the questions correctly. It gives them little tutorials they can go to. Again, not always part of the other math programs. So scaffolding is built into the program and is carried over into the games. Students receive feedback immediately while they're building their procedural fluency. For the math musicals, the stories and music help engage students. It's hard not to be engaged when singing or humming, but it's built on that research that shows there's a connection between music and memory. So those theories are used here. The math musicals are accompanied by a storybook, which tells the story of Newton and Descartes' mathematical adventures. And each musical story contains sheet music along with a book of rich differentiated math tasks to extend their thinking. These math musicals just aren't something you find on YouTube. They're specifically for this program. And the story makes that ELA connection and helps show that math is relevant. So those are kind of the components to the program. Each chapter begins with an overview. You can see on the screen here, number one there, the overview. It helps you know where the learner is going in the learning targets and where they've been. And it shows success criteria, which is kind of one of the favorites from the teachers. And it shows that progression. If you look through the grades, if this were a first grade teacher manual, it shows what the learning targets were the previous year and what the learning targets are for the next year. And so it shows that progression. And then through the chapter, each standard is laid out where in the chapter you're going to hit that standard. So you can map that out for your assessments. So teachers really liked that component. It was very easy to follow. As far as what we were really looking at for a math pilot, this particular program was really well aligned to Moore County Schools K-5 math frameworks. Every lesson had a learning target, and they called it a dig in or circle time. There's explore and grow, which can be used for whole group mini lessons. There's think and grow and show and grow, which can be used for small group, teacher led, and then apply and grow, which can be used for the independent practice time. There were additional resources like games and differentiated tasks that could be used to support the framework components. Formative assessments in each lesson, performance tasks in each chapter, and pre and post assessments for each chapter. So very data driven. The lessons relate strategies to previous lessons. So very reflective in their process, and every lesson had a closure. Lesson components are structured to follow a gradual release model, which were some of the things that teachers really liked about that. Questions provided in the teacher manual were set up to facilitate conversations for math talks, and they were very student-centered. There was a consistent lesson structure from grade level to grade level, and that really supports some of our most needy students. Also, the ELL support is consistent from grade level to grade level, lesson to lesson. Vocabulary focus, the resources, questioning techniques, and the models that are utilized were very consistent from grade level to grade level. So it really did support best practices, and there was a lot really that can help with math talks. And there weren't a lot of programs that had things that kind of aligned to that piece. For the multi-tier system of support, really, a lot of the programs were okay in this area as you think about how we use this math program, because this will be the work in PLCs, aligning the materials for the core, what all students get, and then what materials for some, for supplemental, and then what materials for intensive, our most needy students. And there were many resources in this program, as well as the online component. They had those scaffolding activities and then gave you easier or harder problems based on need. So that was a really, really great component. So let's look at the funding for the math textbooks. As you know, before we implemented the pilot, we were banking funds to prepare for a large purchase. So at the end of 2019-2020, our balance was $1,187,705. The math textbooks, as well as our projected annual costs, are covered under that balance. And with the estimated state textbook allotment, our beginning balance will still cover our future projected annual costs. So based on the needs of the K-5 classrooms, budget projections over the next 5 years, the recommendation is to purchase the Big Ideas Math program. It's for 5 years, so we get materials for 5 years. And after for the regular classroom and for the EL teacher and students, and then 1 year's worth for EC teacher kits and student resources. And after 1 year, we'll kind of review the EC materials. As a side note, the vendor responsiveness and communication has been phenomenal. They're giving free teacher and student sets to our 2 blend ed classrooms at Mid-Deeds Creek. So free for them, for the 2 new classrooms. Free K-5 teacher sets for the EC pullout classrooms for every building, and free K-5 literature connection sets for all the buildings. So I hope you're as excited as we are about the math pilot and the math program that we're choosing. We're really excited. So thank you for listening.
This is Stacy. I actually have a few questions, if you don't mind, Heather.
Absolutely.
Okay. First is, are the teachers going to get trained for this?
Thank you for asking that. Absolutely. Training isn't part of the purchase because it's free for the amount of materials that we're buying, which we are buying through the NCTPI textbook depository. So it's an easy purchase that way. And so professional learning is coming through as a free service. Because of the virus, we are having online virtual professional development that will begin this month, and there will be 4 opportunities for teachers to participate in professional learning provided by the vendor, and then the math curriculum specialists, as well as our instructional support facilitators, will be looking at creating a plan for full implementation, full participation, and real follow-up throughout the year as we implement the new math books.
Okay, that was actually, you answered one of my other questions. And then one other thing is, so I've taught investigations and also guided math, and the transition I've learned was a little harder from going from investigations to guided math as far as teaching. How are our 4th and 5th graders? Is it going to be an easier transition for 4th and 5th graders because some have been on probably guided math since 2nd grade? How is that transition for them to learn something new, a new program?
That's a great question. And I think that will all come down to the summer curriculum work, where we look at our pacing guides and curriculum and start thinking about the alignment and our task analysis and what was and what will be, and kind of look at that crosswork. Also the work in PLCs, identifying what students need and transitioning them. The PLCs are really strong at this point when we're thinking about the delivery. So I think that will be a component that we'll probably have to put into place.
Did you have any teachers complain about that at all, or? Well,
Not at all. Not at all. The feedback has been overwhelmingly big for Big Ideas Math. Everyone felt that everything about this was what Moore County schools needed.
Great, thank you.
Heather, this is Dr. Betty Brown. Looking at the textbooks, they have a volume 1 and 2. How is that going to correlate with our curriculum and our semesters?
I think that will be the work that's part of the summer curriculum work when they look at the alignment. If that's what you're asking about, how we'll pace that out and look at the alignment. We have all of the teachers who participated in the pilot, as well as instructional coaches, working this summer to do that work. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
Betty, you'll need to unmute.
Oh, she gave thumbs up.
No, one other question. How many teachers were using this big ideas as a pilot?
All of Robbins Elementary, all K-5.
So how many, I don't know how many teachers that is.
That would be about 14 to 18. My apologies for not knowing the exact number.
And that includes the EC teachers and.
Yeah, and the dual language teachers,
Okay.
so it may be more than that. I can get you that exact number.
That's okay. Then my other question would be, how is this correlate with what's offered in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in the middle school? How are they transitioning?
Well, they're all aligned to the state standards, and so the state standards progression is all mapped out for you. And so
Okay.
we will continue that progression through the curriculum work.
All right. Thank you.
Questions?
If I could, Ms. Stewart, if you could clarify the summer curriculum development work that we do, does that not also look at vertical alignment? And would Dr. Brown's question be a relevant one for our teachers to look at during their summer curriculum work?
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, any other questions?
Ms. Stewart, this is
Yes.
John Weaver. It's obvious from what you described that there are many standout features for big ideas. What were some of the drawbacks to this as opposed to some of the other piloted programs?
That's a great question. I didn't hear any negatives from the participants who used the program. I can pull out some positives from some of the other programs that were a little slightly different, that they were only different, but not necessarily challenges or negatives. I think maybe the only piece would be those teachers who were not as proficient online and working with the online materials and thinking about teaching and learning using those components for flipped learning and project-based learning. So there's a learning curve and some professional development that is needed.
Okay, so no major weakness stands out in your mind?
No.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? I'm very pleased to hear that this program is so nicely integrated both within the classroom and online, since we don't know what our future might hold with online instruction, but to know that we do have some remote learning days ahead and that the materials that are available through this program will facilitate that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, may I?
Move on.
I just want to, well, I do want to compliment Ms. Stewart and everyone involved in the process. It is very intensive, even under the best of circumstances. But in a year where Ms. Stewart was very committed to ensuring that teachers were driving this decision, you really have to be intentional about how to do that. And so with all the other things our teachers had to do with remote learning, for everybody that followed her lead and participated in this process, we're very grateful. Also want to point out too, and thank our administrative staff. It was a heavy lift back in 2014 and 15 to get us to a point where we had summer curriculum work done by teachers. When I first arrived, pacing guides were something that the central office did and gave to everybody, but now the pacing guides belong to our teachers. And the work of Heather and our instructional specialists is very key to this. They've embraced this new approach to curriculum development. And so this board can take great satisfaction in the fact that what we've built over time is a framework for evaluating materials such as textbook adoptions and modifications to curriculum on an ongoing basis that are truly teacher-driven and facilitated by leadership. And so Heather, to you, pass that along to all your colleagues over there in the curriculum and instruction department that we're very pleased with all the work they're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, pacing guides should belong to the teacher, so thank you for ensuring that.
We've come a long way with that in that regard. Yep. And Heather and Bridget Johnson and Mike Metcalf and Tim Locklear and others deserve a lot of credit for that. Okay, Madam Chair, with your permission,
Let's move on.
I'll defer now to, I'm assuming that somebody's going to hand this off to Ms. Amanda Dixon. Let me make sure I give everybody, no, it's Amanda. She doesn't need any introduction. Amanda, item 2E then.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Dr. Grimacy, board members. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. As you know, we have spent the last 18 to 22 months in the world of CTE preparing for Perkins 5 and all of the new requirements that come with that new program. One of those being that we now have a local comprehensive needs assessment that takes the place of what everyone may remember as our learning planning system, and it is our annual review of our programs, and it drives our funding from all of our funding sources for the year. I do want to mention that this is now a 2-year plan and will be reviewed on an annual basis, but this is a change from what we are accustomed to with the LPS previously. And I just want to make mention of where we are with those PRCs. We do have a combination of state and federal funding. PRC 013 is what we use for our personnel in CTE, and it is derived from months of employment. We did receive an increase this year, but you will notice that that increase does not reflect the months that are allocated to local charter schools. Usually we receive that notification somewhere mid-year. So that number does not reflect that. PRC 014, we had a slight decrease this year, and that is our state allocation for the year. We are still waiting on federal allocation, so I do not have an exact number for PRC 017, but we used last year's budget for planning purposes for PRC 017. And then PRC 064, we have been fortunate the last few years to receive a middle school expansion grant that has afforded us the opportunity to have a middle school career development coordinator and provide some work-based learning opportunities to our middle schools. So that is what that funding is allocated for. But as you know, we bring this to you on an annual basis for your review and your endorsement for the year.
Anyone have questions for Ms. Dixon?
Amanda, this is Ed. I have a question. The
Yes,
recent legislation for the CTE instructors that they didn't go through all the licensing requirements, is that going to benefit us?
Yes and no. It's still a very unique situation for CTE licensing. We are able to use, there's a little bit more flexibility in using some work-based experience for consideration moving forward, but probably not as much flexibility as we would have liked to have seen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Amanda, this is Pam. My question is, great job on securing the grant for the support position. Is that something that you typically do each year, or is this the first time for that grant to be received?
We do reapply for it on an annual basis. We have to have our personnel plan. We use it as a personnel position. It's a pretty restricted program. We do have to have an annual review from NCDPI to receive the funding. We are on year 4 of that. It's a 7-year grant, and we have been afforded the grant. This will be our 4th year.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? All right. It's an amazing CTE program, reaching into all sorts of areas. So we appreciate you keeping it all in line. I read over the list of teachers and all the different the subject areas, not exactly subject areas, but career areas that they were in, and trying to visualize what they all were. But they were definitely well spaced throughout the county. and feel like we're taking a lot of good programs to a lot of different kids.
Thank you.
I have one more comment I'd like to make, Amanda, for the public to understand that Moore County School CTE program was the only program in the Sand Hills region and the only program in the affinity group that we're in for measuring CTE programs. The only one not only to meet but exceed all 8 standards and goals set by the state.
Yes, sir, we were. All 8 academic performance measures, we are very excited. Our staff and our teachers have worked very hard. Our students are showing what great things they're capable of doing. We have a lot to celebrate.
Ms.
Thank
Dixon,
you.
Yes, sir.
this is John Weaver. Looking at the classes and the instructors, I noticed there are 4 vacancies there. What are your plans for those?
Actually, we are interviewing throughout the district for those vacancies. We had a couple of retirements, and we had 2 career development coordinator positions at the high school level who went into a different position in the district. And so that allowed us to have those 2 vacancies there. But all of the schools are currently reviewing applications at this time for those vacancies.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, other questions? All right, well, thank you so much.
Madam
Thank
Chair,
you.
Madam Chair, if I could, before Amanda tunes out, Amanda, I'm going to put you on the spot just a little bit, but
Okay.
do you know how many, under the current definition of workforce credentials, do you know the number of credentials that our students earned in the most recent year, 18-19?
No, sir.
It's 3,923. 3,923. I think your first year, Amanda, was 16-17, was it not, with Moore County?
Yes, sir.
Well, under Ms. Dixon's leadership, our CTE teachers and our students, our CTE teachers helped our students increase from 807 workforce credentials in 16-17 to 3,923 in 18-19. Now, those definitions are subject to change in these next couple of years, I do believe, but I think you'll be hard pressed anywhere in North Carolina to find a place where students have gained that many of those credentials in such a short period of time. So Amanda, to you and to our entire CTE team, I say thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Grimacy, tell them how many they did the first semester this year.
That number is impressive, but I don't happen to have it right here in front of me. Does either one of you?
Was it 27, about 2,700 or 2,500, somewhere there?
Yes, sir. It's around 2,500, and we're actually testing today. So we're hoping that we'll be able to, come close to meeting last year's numbers, despite what's going on with COVID-19.
Well, by anybody's measure, whatever the measure is, when it comes to career workforce preparation, Moore County Schools is certainly among the elite across the state. And Amanda, your leadership needs to be recognized for that, but I know you're going to share that with everybody else. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
With your permission, Madam Chair?
Let's move then. Thank you, Ms.
Yes,
Dixon.
ma'am.
Thank you.
At this time, Dr. Kim Bullard apparently is not sharing the billing with Dr. Metcalf or Dr. Lochner, so she also does not get any introduction. So Kim, at this time, we're going to turn it over to you, and I believe you have 2 F, G, H, I, and J.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. All yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members, and Dr. Grimacy. I am requesting approval on 5 contracts related to services that are needed for the Exceptional Children's Department for the upcoming school year. These are contracts that we have had previously and we are renewing. All contracts being presented for approval have not had an increase in cost from our last school year. The first contract being presented for your approval is with Sand Hills Children's Center. The contract with Sand Hills Children's Center provides services to our students who meet the criteria for services that need to be provided in a developmental day center. The funds are made available through the State Board of Education to assist in providing special education services to students with disabilities in which the local LEA has placed them in this developmental day center. The state reimbursement rate and agreed upon cost is $999.10 per child per month, or the developmental day program rate issued by the Department of Public Instruction for the 2020-21 school year, and it shall be paid in 10 monthly payments. An allotment of $50 shall be paid per child per month for education supplies and materials. Children entering the center after September 15th will receive prorated funding. The contract will serve no more than 35 students ages 3 through 5. Are there any questions related to the proposed contract with Sandhills Children's Center?
Ms. Bullard or Dr. Bullard,
Yes, ma'am.
as we've had the long distance learning in these past 3 months, and of course we're talking about some very fragile children when you deal with the children served through this contract. Does it continue on when we go into long distance learning? How is that affected as programming changes?
So we still continue to pay Sandhills Children's Center for these services as long as they're operating. This funding still comes in from the state. So our funding source was not cut. So as long as Sandhills Children's Center is operational, then those children would be available to attend as long as they're up and running.
I know that, and I don't think the developmental day children actually are attending during the day, but I know they do come in a side door and receive various therapies, speech therapy, occupational therapy, whatever.
Yes, ma'am.
As needed basis. But I didn't know if there were some kind of online plans to be able to serve this very special population.
They've tried to reach out as best they can to serve this population as it is appropriate with all of our other students as well. So depending on the need, they have been able to serve it somewhat, but at least make contact.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, it would be a very difficult thing to do with some of the very, like I say, fragile needs.
Yes, ma'am.
Of these children. We're glad they're there, though.
Yes.
Other questions?
Dr. Bullard, this is John Weaver.
Yes, sir.
How long have we been using the Sandhills Children's Center for providing these services? Do you know?
Sir, I do not know, but I'd be glad to find that information out and report it back to you.
Okay. Do the children spend the entire day at the Children's Center? Or?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In the contract, I noticed that in section 3, under term, we have a start date of August 10th through May 28th, which doesn't align with our school calendar. Is that by design, or should it be aligned with our school calendar?
It should align with our school calendar. We put it in there so that if we needed to have any flexibility with teachers going in for that, because we do have some staff that go into Sandhills Children's Center and interpreting services. That's the way it's written like that, but they are there for the school year.
Okay, so the dates in the contract are by design. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Weaver, I will add that one of the reasons why Dr. Bullard did not know the answer off the top of her head is because our partnership with Sandhills Children's Center goes back quite a number of years and certainly predates her tenure. I also would add that the purpose of this is that there are specialized services that Sandhills Children's Center offers to small populations of students that makes it far more efficient for us to use their services than to maintain our own full-time staff for these particular needs. Dr. Bullard, correct me if I misspeak.
Yes, sir. You're exactly right.
And Mr. Weaver, I think we've been using the Children's Center since it opened. It originally started at Our Savior Lutheran Church, and I think we've been sending children with special needs there from the very beginning.
How far back is that, Ms. Carter?
Oh, at least to about 1982, 1983, somewhere around there.
So it might take Dr. Bullard a few years to get that answer for you, Mr. Weaver.
And it is interesting to see the big yellow bus pull up to the door at the Children's Center and these very small children be brought running chairs to wheel on in.
They're good partners. With your permission, Madam Chair?
Please go
on. Dr. Bullard.
The second and third contract for your approval are for nursing services that we provide for our students. We do have two different service providers for nursing services because of a parent request. One contract is with Maxim Healthcare and the other contract is with IntelliChoice. Maxim Healthcare Services provides services to two of our students who need individual nursing services as prescribed by their IEP, and IntelliChoice provides services to one student. The cost of the services will be billed at $37 an hour, not to exceed 7.5 hours per day for each nurse required from both companies. Are there any questions related to the proposed nursing contracts with IntelliChoice and Maxim?
Any questions?
I'm sorry, this is Stacy. I was just curious, was that because it was in the student's IEP to have a different healthcare service?
No, ma'am. The parent had a special request.
Okay.
And so we honored that request.
Okay.
At the same rate. Yeah.
Kim, this is Ed. Public needs to understand that these are not nurses that we normally have in our schools. These are nurses that are specialized for the specific areas they're working in.
Right, and it is aligning with the students' needs based on their IEP.
Thank you.
Dr. Bullard, this is John Weaver again, and can I assume that the contract dates, well, on several of these that don't align with the school year are for the same reason that the Sandhills Children's Center contract did not align?
Yes, sir, and the contract dates were written before we had the change in the schedule.
Yeah.
So we haven't rewritten the contracts to align to the change in the schedule since the COVID changes.
Okay, but that's not going to affect our cost in any way?
No, sir.
Okay.
Dr. Bullard, relative to Mr. Weaver's question also, do extended year services come into play with the alignment of contract with school year?
Yes, sir. If we have a child that needs extended year services, then that would be absorbed through our contract, and we would have to do an addendum to the contract to allow for that extra time.
And if you know up front that you're going to have to extended year services, that might actually be reflected in the original contract as well. Not in this case, but in other cases.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Weaver, just make sure the public understands that extended year services are available to children with disabilities at any time during the year. So it is possible that you could have a alignment of contracts that doesn't line up if it includes that up front. If not, we may have an amendment, which we have done in the past for children that have extended year services. Hopefully that helps.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Also, before we move on, Dr. Bullard, if you could just pause for just a minute, I want to take this opportunity. It's a teachable moment that the investment in the needs of these children, the legitimate identified needs of these children, are running about $60,000 per child for just this service. This does not include the other services for these children. For individuals who would purport to be experts in the cost of education now compared to what it was 50 years ago. These would be individuals that might have been not served in the past at all, would not have had access to educational services, or may have been institutionalized, and that cost would have shown up someplace else. We are very proud to serve these families and these children, but I do think that it's a moment for me to help highlight the fact that when a child has these needs, we are obligated under federal law to provide these needs, and we are also morally obligated to meet these needs, and we embrace that. Mr. Dennison, what is the most recent estimate of what the federal government's contribution is to the total cost of the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act? It's approximately what percent?
12, I think. It was 12 and a half, somewhere around there.
Right. So federal requirement. Yeah, I actually think it's a little bit higher than 12, but it's not 20%. It's below that. And the original legislation was that the federal government would cover 40% of that cost. And the most that the federal government has ever covered is 22%. So once again, it gets pushed down to the local level. We are very proud of the services we provide for our children. We do so without question, but sometimes it'd be a little helpful if there was a little understanding on some people's part of what the true cost of education is in the 21st century. Madam Chair, with your permission, I'll get back to Dr. Bullard.
The fourth contract being presented for your approval is with All American Interpreters for the Deaf. The contract with All American Interpreters for the Deaf provides services to our students who need sign language interpreting services. The cost of these services will be billed at $45 an hour unless requested with less than a 24-hour notice, and then the billing rate will be $67.50 an hour. There will also be the cost of mileage reimbursement at the approved federal rate. Currently, these services are required for one student as identified by their individualized education plan. A Moore County Schools employee has been hired to provide these services for the other students in our district that require this service. Anytime an interpreter is out, All American provides a substitute for the interpreter, whether it is a contracted position or a Moore County Schools position. Are there any questions related to the proposed All American Interpreting Services contract? Okay. The final of the contracts being presented for your approval today is with John E. Sexton and Associates. The contract with John E. Sexton and Associates provides services for Moore County School students who need audiological services. The cost of these services will be billed at $505 per day and will be rendered 3 days each week. There will also be the cost of mileage reimbursement at the approved federal rate. Are there any questions related to the proposed John Sexton contract renewal?
Yeah, Dr. Bullard, I guess my other question might be, it's interesting to me that this is done on a per day basis rather than an hourly basis. And I see that they're only there approximately 3 days each week. Is there a reason we do it per day rather than by the hour? Do we get a better rate that way?
To be honest with you, I do not know, but I will find that out. This contract was in place prior to my tenure in this position, so I'll find out the rationale behind the reasoning for that.
Thank you. All right, I think we can keep moving. Unless anyone has other questions.
This is Pam, and I just have a question. With the audiology and the disability, I would say our last 3 contracts. Kim, how has those been affected for our students with our remote learning? Are they going into homes? Has it been suspended?
So it depends on the level of need and the level of service. Our All-American interpreter contract, we haven't used those. The Moore County Schools interpreters have been touching base with all of our students that need the interpreting services. So since we've been closed, the All-American we have not used. As far as our audiological services, we have been using those because we need to make sure that our students have access to online materials in the virtual platform, and devices are hooking up and connecting. So we have been using our audiological contract. The nursing services we have not been providing since the students are at home.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Bullard.
Thank you.
And Madam Chairman, I will offer the next item, which is item 2K. Board members, on May 27th, Chair Carter and I received a letter from Mr. Vincent Gordon on behalf of the Southern Pines Land and Housing Trust, in which he requested an extension of the time period that has been established for the trust to negotiate with the school district for the purchase of the Southern Pines Primary School property. You'll recall that you approved a resolution on December 9th and amended that resolution on February 10th, in which you established your intentions and process by which you will dispose of the Aberdeen primary and elementary school properties and the Southern Pines primary and elementary school properties. That resolution established the following prerequisites for a negotiated settlement. One, that the party that's interested in acquiring the property pay the appraised value of $630,000. Two, that the parties sign an indemnification agreement in the form of in a form satisfactory to the superintendent and legal counsel to indemnify the board against any third-party claims arising out of the decision to sell the property directly to the trust in accordance with statute. And 3, provide an opinion of counsel letter clarifying that the trust meets all legal criteria under the statute for a private sale based on their intent to preserve the site for its historic value. The timeline that has been established for the marketing and eventual sale of the Southern Pines primary and elementary properties currently begins August 1, 2020. It's here this coming August. The timeline includes the implementation of the upset bid process, which is not scheduled to begin until October 1st, with a goal to bring forth a recommendation to the school board at its regular monthly meeting in December or January. So when asked for an extension, in consultation with our legal counsel and with Mr. Barath, it's clear that right now we are not actively marketing the Southern Pines properties because we need those properties at least through January of 2021. We will, however, begin marketing those properties on August 1, and from that point on, it would become very difficult for us to market the properties if those properties are being held back from anybody else's interest because of any sort of negotiations that are underway. So, Madam Chair, extending the period of time which the trust may refine its plan for adherence to the prerequisites of the school board's resolution that presents no disruptive impact on the timeline for marketing the properties or the upset bid approach, as long as that extension is limited to August 1st. So barring any questions or concerns from the board, it's the superintendent's intention to offer for the board's approval a recommendation that the board extend the deadline. Recommend that the school board approve an extension of the deadline for the Southern Pines Land and Housing Trust to meet the conditions previously approved by the board for private sale of the Southern Pines Primary School from June 1, which it currently is, to August 1. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, are there questions concerning this? As Dr. Grimsey and I discussed, it does not change any details of our agreement with the West Southern Pines Trust. It simply gives them an additional amount of time to pull their funding together. So are there questions for Dr. Grimsey?
This is Ed. I just have one. If I remember now, if they're willing to pay the appraised value, then we could do something then.
There are 3 conditions, Mr. Dennison, which I just outlined. There,
right.
2 of those have to do with documents that have to be provided. The other one is to offer the appraised value, yes.
And the appraised value is the value of the property at the time it was appraised.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Which for this property is $630,000.
Yes.
Right.
Are there other questions?
But the request was simply for the extension. And so looking at what activities related to this property between now and August 1, I see no reason why I could not recommend an extension. I agree.
Dr. Grimsey, this is Helena. A quick question about the Aberdeen properties. When will that marketing begin?
That was going to be covered in Mr. Barath's presentation to you next week in his construction update. As of now, we're also looking at that. It could be as early as July 1. Most likely that's going to be August 1. And that has to do with the market at this point. We're still working with our commercial realtors. There has been interest, particularly in the Aberdeen Elementary site on Route 1. And so we just really have to get it right in terms of the time where we call for the bids in accordance with the market. So it's July 1, August 1. John, we'll have a few things worked out by the time we present to you next week.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions? All right, then let us move on.
Madam Chair, at this time, I'll introduce Mr. Barath, and Mr. Barath will manage items 2L, to M to N to O, P, and Q. Mr. Barath.
And R. Right.
And R. Thank you. R as well.
Keep something good rolling. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Some of these are going to be rather routine. They're the same things that we present to the school board each year. The first one has to do with the child nutrition fees for the upcoming school year. As required by the federal government, if the operations of the department has a negative balance by December 31st, that they need to make adjustments to the meal cost to get back to a revenue neutral. As of December 31st, 2019, Moore County Schools Child Nutrition Department was operating in a positive balance and actually at the time trending on a net gain at that time. So at this point, it is a recommendation of staff that the paid meal costs for breakfast and lunch remain the same for 2020-2021 school year. And those costs are $1.25 for lunch for breakfast for all grade levels, $2.50 for lunch kindergarten through 8 grade levels, and $2.75 for grade levels 9 through 12. And I'm open to address any questions you may have.
Any questions? No, please, we can hold the line at the same cost.
So are we.
All right.
All right, the next item is the bid awards and renewals. As we presented some to you last month, we have a few right now, and then the last of them will come in at your July board meeting. Right now, as you may recall, we participate in the North Carolina Procurement Alliance, which is an alliance of majority of school districts across the state that increases our purchasing power to reduce the costs. And the alliance has opened and renewed the bids for produce, milk, and ice cream. These results of no impact, no growth, no increase to the operations of the schools. And so it comes with staff recommendation that you consider the bids for the produce, milk, and ice cream at no cost increase. And I'm here to respond to any questions you may have regarding this.
Any questions? All right, seeing none, then let's move on, Mr. Barath.
Moving on. Then the school facility use application. Again, each year we bring this to the board. We made a major change to this a couple of years ago that incorporated things such as requiring certificates of insurance by users and use groups, custodial supplies, fees and impacts, as well as for staffing, use of kitchen, and et cetera, et cetera. Working with principals that have been positively received by all schools and those using, and there are no changes recommended for this year, and propose to continue to use the existing application and fees that's been established. And if you have any questions on that.
I have a question. This is John
Yes,
Weaver. The fees that are collected, how are they used?
They're used at the schools to offset the cost of staffing, supplies for custodial. Maybe they had to bring in an SRO for a certain event. And also if they have to use of the any kitchen or preparation area there.
Okay, so they remain at the school.
They remain at the school.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I would guess that most of the charges just barely cover the costs that are incurred when the property is actually used, such as the electricity fee that comes in from running football field lights or something similar.
Those are taken into consideration into the rates established.
All right,
John, this is Pam. My question is, the application indicated individuals had to present their certificate of insurance for liability. And I was wondering, has there been a case particularly for this school year to where, a recent school year to where we've had to use liability from someone getting hurt, or I was just curious.
We have not to this date had any damage to property or to person. through the use of these facilities that have been brought to my attention. I believe I would have heard if it had happened, but I'm not aware of any claims to damage to property or people at any time during the use.
Thank you. That's
Mr.
always very, very encouraging to hear.
Mrs. Thompson, just to make sure the public record is clear, Mr. Cox oversees risk management programs. Mr. Cox, are you aware of any information that would be contrary to what Mr. Barath just said?
I have not filed any claims with the school board's trust who administers our liability insurance.
Very good. Thank you. Is that satisfactory, Ms. Thompson?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, John.
All right, I believe we can move on again, Mr. Brath.
Very well. The next item is award a bid for Aberdeen Elementary in the classroom interactive displays. Just to remind the board that with these 4 new elementary schools and the major additions being taken place at Northmore High School, the technology department has taken this opportunity to define a standard for interactive classroom displays moving forward, and has, through their working with teachers, specialists, and schools, have all selected the ClearTouch displays system and software as the basis of provision. And so here for Aberdeen, just as we did at McDeeds Creek, and you would have seen those display boards in the classrooms when you visited the school, Kent Eklund, through the Demand Star online system, a request for proposals was sent to 82 different vendors. As a result of that effort, 4 bids were submitted. And based on the bids submitted and the cost reviewed, Next Wave Tech was the lowest responsible bidder for the provision and installation of these displays at Aberdeen Elementary. I want to remind the board that while the cost just over $264,000, it comes through the county school construction bond, and it remains within the approved project budget. And so I'm here along with Kent Eklund to respond to any questions you may have.
Mr. Barath?
Yes.
This is John Weaver. Have we worked with Next Wave Tech before?
I will have to have Kent respond to that, and everything technology has performed and done.
Yes, the company itself is the staffing, the sales and the engineering and the support staff are a team that we've worked with before.
And that's been a good experience, I assume.
Yes.
Okay,
Any other questions?
Mr. Eklund, this is Helena again, just to follow up on that question. Who did the McDeeds Creek installation for us?
It was the same actual staff. The company that they worked for previously, they have changed the name of the overarching company.
Okay, so they're familiar with our setup and our needs.
Yes, yeah, we worked with them extensively on both the flexibility for the powered boards for the lower grades and the fixed boards in some of the other classrooms. So they know what our standard is for how we've deployed the power and the wall supports at all the school construction.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Kent, this is Pam. I believe, if not mistaken, that I read the warranty for that equipment is guaranteed for a year at least. Is that typically what you see?
No, it's 5 years. It's 5 years.
years. Okay.
Yeah, we've ensured that there's a 5-year warranty for the.
Okay, that's better. Thank you.
There's a statutory requirement of 1 year on any labor performed.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, other questions? And then Ms. Barrett, let's move on again.
Very well. Next item again deals with Aberdeen Elementary, and this is for the paging speakers and the installation of them. And on May 22nd, bids were received through an informal process for the purchase and installation of these devices at the new Aberdeen school. We received 4 bids, and they are noted on the summary. Coming up here. It's the next agreement, not that one. There it is. The 4 bids were received there, and the apparent low and responsive bidder in this situation was NetSource Enterprise Technologies. They've performed this work at schools throughout the state, and they have also performed other work on our schools here at Moore County Schools. Staff recommends, again, in this case, that the amount of just over $66,000 for the provision and installation of these funds be approved, and is also, just like the previous one, paid through the county school construction bond, and it does fit within the approved project budget. And Mr. Eklund and I are here to address any questions you may have.
Any questions? I'm just delighted to see these things wrapping up.
Very good. So are we.
Agreed.
With your permission to go on the next item.
Yes, please.
And this one, I'm going to change to Northmore. This is for the athletic equipment that to be provided in the auxiliary gym at the school, as well as in the wrestling room. These items were put out for bid, and on May 20th, we received 3 bids for the following items: the wrestling mat hoist to be in the auxiliary gym, volleyball standards, the net, the pads, the referee stand, and those type of items, the wrestling room floor mat and wall pads, auxiliary gym scoreboard, and an indoor batting cage to be raised and lowered inside the auxiliary gym. The 3 bids that were received, the lowest apparent responsive and responsible bid was by Learning Environments, who have done work throughout the region, as well as in the past at Moore County Schools, and the amount of just over $67,000. And again, this work is provided, this funding is provided by the county through their direct financing of the funds for this project, and fit within the approved project budget. And I'm here to respond to any questions you may have.
John, this is Ed. I have a comment and a question.
Yes, sir.
We have almost $150 million worth of construction going on. And am I correct in assuming the only 2 things that you have not estimated or included in our budget for these projects has been the problem at Pinehurst Elementary with the asbestos, and the problem with the land, somebody dumped something in the land at Northmore. And if so, and those 2 projects, which were outside because they were not anticipated, how were they paid for? And did the county give us anything for picking up the tab for those 2 things that were unanticipated?
Those unanticipated costs, Mr. Denison, were paid through the contingencies that were in the project budgets. They were outside the anticipated scope, which is, again, goes back to why we always want to make sure we identify a contingency for a project.
You know, I want to congratulate you, because it's, of all the things we're doing, these are the only 2 things that have come up that have not been anticipated. And I think that's a great job.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Moran, I'm sorry.
No, Madam Chair, please. Go ahead.
A question about the items that are being purchased at Northmore. Were the coaches consulted in the selection of things such as the nets and pads and one of the referee stands, the wrestling floor mat, as these purchases, or as the specifics were put together to get the bids?
Yes, the school staff through Jenny Purvis has consulted with her staff through not only just these, but the ongoing planning and the selection of furniture, fixtures, and equipment throughout this process.
That's good. Thank you.
Mr. Baraff,
Yes,
this is Helena. How does the equipment that's being purchased for the Northmore Auxiliary Gym compare to the equipment being purchased that we had purchased previously for Pinecrest and Union Pines?
They are the same, with the exception of the indoor batting cage. That is the only difference here.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? All right, then I suppose we can move on again.
Well, the last item I have is the donation of a video display unit for the John Williams Athletic Complex at Pinecrest High School. If you allow me just to do a voice check here. I have asked Mr. Jeff Hewitt, the athletic director of Pinecrest, to also be a part of this presentation. I just want to confirm he is on and his speaker works.
Yes,
Jeff?
John, I'm here.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
At the Pinecrest High School, the Pinecrest Athletic Club Football Booster Organization has been approached by an organization outside of the school known as the Friends of the Football Booster Club. This club wanted to donate a video display, Jumbotron, many of you are familiar with that term, and a new sound system at the John Williams Athletic Complex. This will replace the existing scoreboard and sound system currently in the stadium at the site. The current display, scoreboard and sound system used by all the outdoor athletics and band and any other activities that occur out in the stadium and on the field. However, it is rather dated and the quality is not what it used to be. The new Jumbotron is a digital sound system and screen, which will bring opportunities for audience participation as well as sponsorship. It is expected that through the corporate sponsorships, which will increase from a current level of $25,000 annually to $40,000 and possibly more annually. This funds will also provide additional opportunities for the students. The Friends of the Football Booster Club has estimated the system at about $300,000. And the donation is being funded by the members of the Friends of the Football Booster Club and corporate sponsorships. It is considered a funding program of 0% interest unsecured loan, and there will not be any funds required by the school district for this installation of the donation. It's all paid for by the Friends of the Football Boosters Club. Attached to this executive summary is just a general image of what the Jumbotron would look like. Ms. May, if you wouldn't mind selecting that at the bottom of the document. And so it is a large unit out there, approximately 32 feet wide.
Are there questions?
I have a question. Would we be able to use that for graduation as well at some point? So parents can see their kids walk across the stage?
We'll let Mr. Hewitt respond to that, but it's my intention that being a digital board, it can be used for that as well as any events that occur on there.
That's awesome.
A projection onto the screen. Mr. Hewitt?
That is correct. That is correct. Where we're at right now is with football, also we'll also have 6 different programs being able to use this video board, and along with band and graduation with something in there too.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hewitt, this is Helena Wallen-Miller. I seem to recall when we were in the final, was it the Final Four a couple of years ago? And we went up to Raleigh, and there was, at that high school in Raleigh, they had something similar up on their field, if I recall. Does anybody else remember that?
There are quite a few schools that already have Jumbotrons installed, thanks to some gifts such as this one.
Right. And will we be responsible for the maintenance of that, or is there some type of warranty that comes with this?
There is a warranty that comes with this, just like the statutory requirement of labor for 1 year and the warranty on the operating components themselves. I don't have the details of that this time. That is what they are assembling to submit to you for your next week's regular business meeting. There'll be additional details provided at that time.
Mr. Hewitt, do you have an answer to the question?
At this time, we're waiting for Daktronics to get back to us. We submitted that information last week, and that should be coming soon.
Okay. To impress upon them that we will need that information no later than Thursday. Otherwise, we'll have to postpone this action for a month.
Yeah, that leads to my next question. Do we anticipate this being installed prior to the start of what we are hoping is the athletic seasons this fall?
Yes, ma'am. Our plan is by mid.
Ms. Thompson, did you have a question?
I did. I'm sorry, Libby. I just had a follow-up question with Helena for Mr. Hewitt on the installation. Will our staff and team be expected for the install, or how will that work?
No, ma'am. Daktronics will install the board.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
And then Mr. Hewitt as well, I'm assuming we will train an assortment of people in how to use this such that it is not misused.
Yes, ma'am. And one of the things that we're working with through Adam Sabata, he's been moved to our CTE program, is that we want to get our students involved in athletics a little more. And this could be a pathway for our students to be able to learn how to market, to be able to learn how to use the program. And we're excited to be able to get our students involved. This is one more piece of the overall goal of our athletic program.
This is Dr. Brown. Will there be in the contract information on the maintenance and who's responsible for that along after the year of warranty or whatever warranty we get? Mr. Barath or Mr. Hewitt?
Yes, there will, and that's part of the details that Daktronics is assembling to provide.
Okay, thank you.
And Dr. Grimacy, if I will, the question was that the question for Thursday, needing to be answered by Thursday, was the warranty.
Warranty, but maintenance. This will be specialized maintenance. I don't think it's Pinecrest's intention to saddle our IT support and or maintenance department with maintaining such a high quality and sophisticated medium, if you will. And so I'm guessing there'll be a service contract on it where there'll be somebody with a high level of skill that'll be maintaining it. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was my understanding that going forward that may be an expense that's managed at the local level.
Yes, sir. And the plans from this office would be that the money each year that we would raise through advertising, we would put money aside to be able to help and maintain the board itself.
That's the answer I was looking for. Good. Well, it's very impressive that there's some folks out there that have raised $300,000 at this time to be able to present this to Pinecrest. It does point out, however, that we have 2 other schools within our county who are not receiving jumbotrons, and we need to make it clear this is not something that the schools are purchasing for Pinecrest, but that it is truly a gift of some concerned community members. But maybe to look again at what we have at the other 2 high schools and realize that maybe some community support will come along and bring something similar to this to Union Pines or Northmore. But in our efforts to achieve equity within our sports programs, that this does set a new standard for us with the installation of a jumbotron at Pinecrest.
Libby, I do have a comment. Union Pines got a new scoreboard and sound system a couple of years ago. It cost over $100,000, and it was also by corporate sponsors and boosters clubs.
And we do appreciate that community support, certainly.
This is John Weaver. I have one last question, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Do we have any idea what the operating costs will be for this jumbotron?
I do not at this time. I will have Daktronics provide that as part of their package. Again, just to reiterate, I believe everything on this is a complete LED system, which will actually decrease some of our cost of the operating of the scoreboard with that. And the other components are controllers and devices, which are more computer-based than driver-based, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
And I would add, Mr. Weaver, that with the revenue that's been projected at as much as $65,000 a year, in bringing this to the board, it's been the superintendent's assumption that whatever those costs are, that they would be within the enterprise fund that's established, that the revenues that are brought in from the advertising would cover those costs, as they have at Union Pines, by the way. John, correct me if I'm wrong, but neither you nor I have received a bill from Union Pines to operate their smaller version, but nevertheless a jumbotron, but much smaller version. But that expense has not been something the district has picked up.
I have not received anything that from Union Pines for that.
Yeah, they've managed that with their advertising.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Interesting addition to the football field. Happy birthday, Coach Hewitt.
Thank you so much, Livy.
I think it was yesterday, but happy birthday anyway.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, back to you, Dr. Grimacy.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just want to make sure that we're clear that the public understands that the primary reason why the board must act on a donation is because board policy establishes a threshold, and over which any donation to the district that exceeds that threshold must be approved by the school board. And so even though it makes sense that the school board would approve this, we don't have to bring all donations, just those that are that exceed that threshold. And I don't see that in the executive summary, John. Could we, it is in policy 2425. We might want to just articulate that when we put the executive summary together for next week.
I will do that.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members on item R? Madam Chair, as we move on to item S and the board considers its agenda for next week, the superintendent, at the risk of stating the obvious, item R needs to be a board action item because there are some final details that we'll want to present to the board next week before it considers action on the donation of the video display for John Williams Stadium. Other than that, we look forward to the board's affirmation of items A through Q as to what you would like the clerk and the superintendent to assign to board action and what you would like to assign to consent.
All right, what Dr. Grimacy had to say. Any items in A through Q that you would want to see under action? The majority of these are very standard contract extensions to take us into the next year. Either similar in amount or even a little bit less in amount in most cases. So anything A through Q that you want pulled out for action.
This is Ed. I see nothing there that we need to pull out.
This is Betty. I see nothing there that we need to pull out.
All right, then we will go with A through Q for consent. And item R, the donation of the video display, will become an action item, such that we get a little bit more clarification.
One final pause there. Any board members have any exception to that? Okay, hearing none. Madam Chair, with your permission, do you want to proceed with Mr. Cox's presentation, or you want to take a brief break?
Let's take a quick break. Quick break.
It is currently 2:34. It just became 2:34. When do you want everybody to tune back in?
Let's give them 10 minutes.
Okay, so at 2:44, we will resume with Mr. Cox's report on the impact of the proposed county budget on Moore County Schools budget.
Thank you.
Dr. Bob, I just have one question. Did we have to vote on that consent agenda, or are we good of not voting on that?
No, ma'am, it has always been the board's practice to direct the staff.
Okay.
And then next week, when you approve the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, that will then be your opportunity to approve it after you actually see what we print up for you.
Just making sure before we got off.
We appreciate the direction.
Okay, I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, we are now live.
All right, I'll bring this group back into session, and we'll move on to the next report. Dr. Grimacy?
Madam Chair, I'm just going to go directly to Mr. Cox, and if there's anything I feel the need to add, I will do so after he has presented you with some very important information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grimacy. Here is the preliminary analysis, the impact of the proposed county budget on Moore County Schools FY 2020-21 budget. What you're seeing here is the history, the last few years of budgets that the county has provided, as well as a proposed amount down there in 2020-21 of $31,850,000, which shows the reduction of $739,133 from the county. As you'll see, that $31,850,000 is almost in line with the same level of funding that the county provided to us in 2017 and 2017-18.
Mr. Cox, please, could you, if I could interrupt for just a minute. Madam Chair, we are missing Dr. Wells Brown, I believe. Betty, are you on? Excuse me, Andrew. All right, Mrs. Potter.
I'm calling her now.
Yeah, if you could just check on her status. Andrew, Madam Chair, with your permission, I'd like to pause. This is a pretty important information, and
Yes, let's definitely hold up. Now, do we have Mr. Dennison back?
He is connected, but it does not appear as though Mr. Dennison, could you?
I can see it here.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Oh, well.
I'm here and I can see y'all.
Yeah, everybody is showing except Dr. Brown. And so for members of the public that are tuning in, we had a pretty substantial technical difficulty, fortunately, during the break. Bad news is it's causing some delays as we come back. The good news is it was during the break. So we had a chance to remedy that. Madam Chair, if we can just pause long enough to see if
Dr. Brown is trying to log back in. She had issues as well.
Okay.
I've got her on the line waiting until she gets logged in.
Okay.
Okay, so she was back.
Not quite. Yeah, I'm not showing her yet. I'm watching the list of
black, and I don't know what happened.
tell her to just turn her computer off, Mrs. Potter, and reboot her computer. That's what I had to do.
Yeah, that's what I had to do earlier as well.
Just
She's logging out and logging back in as we speak.
Okay. Just want to thank our viewing audience for helping us manage the technical difficulties associated with our virtual approach. But it is important that we have all board members logged in for this part of it.
I was trying to think of a joke I can say, but I have nothing.
Madam, I just remind you that we are live.
Yes, I know. That's why I said that.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, for anybody, any citizens that have just tuned in, we're having some technical difficulties. You have come to the right place if you're listening in on the Moore County Board of Education meeting. You're in the right place. We had some technical difficulties during a break, and we're just now waiting to make sure we've got all of our board members back online here. I appreciate your understanding.
This might be a good place to point out how frustrating it must have been for children in our schools as they worked on online and virtual learning situations this spring to encounter internet problems, computer issues, whatever, when they were intent on being part of a teacher's class, and how that it's something that maybe is unavoidable from time to time, but you certainly don't get that when you're face to face with your teacher in a classroom.
Yes, ma'am, that's true. And Dr. Brown, we welcome you. You want to do
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened.
Okay, can you see us okay?
Yes, I can find.
Very good. Well, if you don't mind, Mr. Cox, if you would just start over with slide 2 and make sure that Dr. Brown has been able to hear the same information you shared with the rest of the board.
All right, welcome back, Dr. Brown. Thank you, Dr. Grimacy. As I was saying here, this slide shows historical funding for the last few years from the county. You see in 2021, the board approved a budget of $36,049,133, which was an increase of $3.4 million over the 2019-20 budget. In blue, you see there that the county proposed to fund the Moore County schools at $31,850,000, which is a reduction of $739,133. That $31,850,000 is very similar to the amount that the county provided funded in 2017-18 school year. Of that $31,850,000, $30,350,000 will be for current expense, $750,000 for digital learning, and $750,000 for capital outlay. So based on COVID-19, the reassignment plan and transfer requests, and county proposed budget, we have revised some fixed cost needs for the budget for next year. So as you see here, we originally requested 6 teachers to meet the K-3 class size reduction mandate. After all transfer requests have been processed, we're only estimating instead of 13 teachers down to potentially 11 teachers now needed. So we have revised that down to 4 teachers at a cost of $70,000, so a reduction from $420,000 down to $280,000. The charter school increase was originally based on the full $36 million request from the Board of Education to the county, which equated to a per pupil expense of $2,480 per student. Based on the county's proposed funding of $31,850,000, that per pupil amount is reduced down to $2,178 per student. So we reduced the proposed increase for charter school expense from $550,000 down to $275,000. Based on COVID-19, the guidance that the Department of Public Instruction has provided, although they do not set raises, they're hearing and advising us to not expect any raise for certified or classified staff. So we have taken the raises out, but we still have to include increased contribution percentages for retirement and hospitalization, which you see the rates there, and we're estimating that to be $200,000. If there were raises for our locally paid employees or any certified staff, we would try to offer a local supplement increase for those certified staff, which would have been $300,000 to maintain our typical 8% supplement. Now we see that's a zero cost. We are still adding the 1 teacher for orchestra at North Moore, so that cost remains the same at $70,000. And the school business system modernization mandate, we've reached out and had a conversation with our current provider, and they have said that if we sign a 3, 4, or 5 year lease, we will be able to reduce or not release 3 or 4 or 5 year agreement to maintain their system. Our cost will be reduced from $50,000, additional $50,000 next year to only additional $40,000. So where we had a fixed cost increase of just over $2 million, again, as I said, after all transfer requests have been processed, revised needs for teachers were reduced to meet the K-3 class size mandate. COVID-19 impact on raises and the county proposed budget funding, our fixed costs have been reduced down to $865,000.
Mr. Cox.
Andrew, before you proceed, can you stay on that slide for a minute? And Mr. Weaver, if you could hold your question, I might answer it before you ask it, just to make sure. If you don't mind, Mr. Weaver.
That's fine.
Okay. Just like to elaborate for just a moment here. Andrew, I think I know what you mean when you say because of COVID-19, but I think to be a little bit more specific, what we mean is the economic impact of COVID-19. And the adjusted revenue projections that the state is looking at have rendered the possibility of any sort of increase for teachers and support staff employees to be nominal at best, if at all. Now, we have received some information from our professional associations that the General Assembly hasn't totally given up on the possibility of raises, but the likelihood of that is almost nil in the observation of most people. What's important for the board and for the public to understand is that even without salary increases, we continue to see the rates, the costs associated with contributions to retirement and hospitalization going up and going up substantially. This has been a pattern that's been going on for a number of years. These are costs for locally funded employees, and they are not covered by the state. And so these are fixed cost increases that do not go away. They are fixed local cost increases. They happen every single year. And if we don't get an increase in local revenue to cover them, then the only alternative that we have is to cut personnel, programs, or other costs to match them. The charter school increase is not necessarily directly related to COVID-19. That is simply an adjustment where if we get less local money from the county, then that affects the per pupil contribution to the charters. And then when multiplied times the number of new charter school children, it's reduced by that total amount that we see. I think that was the clarification I wanted to offer, Mr. Weaver. Don't know if that answers your question or not. But Andrew, was there anything on that I just said where you might need to correct me at all?
No, thank you for the clarification. You're exactly right. It's based on the economic impact of COVID-19.
And the teachers, that's a refinement of our projection on our enrollment for next year, which may or may not be related to COVID-19.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Weaver, thank you.
It answered most of my questions, but I do want a clarification on the first item to make sure that after taking into account of all the transfer requests, that if we drop our number of teachers from 6 to 4 in K3, that we will meet the mandate. Is that correct?
Yes. So we were originally projecting 13 teachers, 7 coming from the state, and needing 6 from local funds to make that total of 13 revised projections. And after fulfilling all transfer requests, that need went down to 11 from 13. Yes, so we would still be in compliance with the K3 class size mandate.
And that still relies on the 7 from the state?
Yes, sir. That still relies on getting 7 from the state. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
These are the estimated locally funded positions. And I would add to that, Mr. Weaver, that this projection is no worse and no better than any other projection that you make with budgeting. So we have a high level of assurance, but I wish at any time I could always give you a 100% guarantee.
I'm well aware of that.
I know you are.
Mr. Cox?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, this is Helena. I had a question about the charter school number. The number there that is 2,178. I went back to our February presentation and saw that the current estimate for this year for our charter per student is 2,287. So to me that says, and just help me understand if my rationale is correct. To me that says that the reason the number is now less is, one, like you said, the number from the county is less. So that when you divide it by the total number of students, that number obviously goes down, but it also tells me that the number of students have gone up, which is why the number overall will be less than this current year. Is that rationale correct? That we'll have more students, less funding, therefore there's a less average per student being given to charter school students?
Yes, that assumption is 100% correct.
Okay, thank you.
What is also 100% correct is that our total cost, in spite of that, goes up 275,000, and without additional local funds to cover it, that has to come from a cut in programs and services to the students that remain in Moore County schools.
Yes,
Correct.
that is correct. All right, so moving on to the next slide, what this shows, this is just a clean version of the revised fixed cost and the revised needs that the board approved. Well, the highest priority need that the board previously approved. So you see the revised fixed cost there of $865,000, which we talked about on the previous slide. And this shows the highest priority needs that the board approved for the budget when we submitted the request to the county. Still implementing that classified salary scale at $850,000 and the board's desire to restore teachers targeting grades 4 through 5 to reduce class size there, which would be those 8 teachers at $560,000. So your highest priority cost would be $1.41 million. One thing that we also need to talk about is we had originally met with the county and they had given us one-time funding for McDeeds Creek at $739,133 that was going to be offset by the consolidation savings from opening of Aberdeen Elementary School and Southern Pines Elementary School. As you recall, we went back to the county and said, well, Southern Pines Elementary School is going to be delayed. It would be great if we could defer some of the savings that we would receive for 1 year, because Southern Pines will not open at the beginning of the year, and we will not realize all those savings to recover that total $739,133. So what we're showing here from opening Aberdeen this year, we are realizing a cost savings from consolidation of $419,000. What you also see there is by still having to operate Southern Pines and not opening it at the beginning of the year, there's still going to be approximately $320,000 in cost that we're going to have to cover for continuing to operate the Southern Pines Elementary School. That will not be cost savings that was to be realized this year of that $739,133.
This is John Weaver. I have a question related to that. We'd see half the savings, would we not, for the consolidation of the Southern Pines schools?
Not necessarily, because part of it is staff, and we're not going to carry staff into a year and then terminate them mid-year. Where we have positions that become open during the year, we'll hopefully move those staff into those vacancies, but it won't be a cutoff at the end of the year when that Southern Pines opens. Dr. Grimacy has anything else to add to that?
Let me just first make sure that answer is satisfactory for Mr. Weaver.
It is. We may see some, but it's not going to be the full. And it may be graduated throughout the course of the second half of the year.
That's the idea, actually, Mr. Weaver. When we get to the halfway point during the year, as we start to realize people resign and retire during the second semester, we've had this happen previously. We just have to budget in such a way that we cover that expense in order to make sure that we don't create chaos at Southern Pines Primary and Southern Pines Elementary for the first semester. If we told everybody that they were going to lose their employment as of January, then we really would see a very unpredictable staffing framework through January, and not one that would be healthy for students. So we've got to give that assurance up front and then tell everybody that starting in January, alert those individuals who won't be continued into the next year, that they won't be in that position. Then that gives them multiple months to be looking for other employment without it impacting the children. So
That makes perfect sense.
yeah. So it may not cost a full $320,000. Some people that just look at spreadsheets may not make any sense, but we look at spreadsheets and we have to look at the needs of children. And so we're going to come down on the side of making sure the children are taken care of. And then we have great confidence that the spreadsheets will balance out by the end of the year. Again, Andrew, correct me publicly if I have spoken anything that's not accurate there.
Nope, you're good.
Okay, thank you.
So what we have here is the updated bottom line. We have the revised fixed cost increases, which now total $865,000. We have the remaining consolidation costs that have to be covered at $320,000. So based on the current proposed level of funding from the county, we would have a budget shortfall to maintain the current level of services in Moore County schools of $1.185 million. So here is just a breakdown of the revised projected allotment based on the county's proposed budget. See here, we had originally asked for $31,749,133 for local expense. The proposed budget, county's proposed budget would give us $27,825. We had originally requested local expense for charter school at $2.8 million based on their reduction in funding. That per pupil goes down, and we would only have $2.525 million. Capital expense remains the same at $750,000. Digital learning remains the same at $750,000. So this $30,830,000 ties back to the previous budget amount. Here is the all funds revised budget projection. We're maintaining state fund at $81.5 million, the local fund, local expense fund 2 at $30,830,000, federal 7.2, capital at $750,000. School nutrition at $5.485 million, and local operations at $3 million for a revised proposed budget for 2021 at $128,765,000. As part of that, $30,830,000, $480,000 would be fines and forfeitures, and I do have a typo here. It's $30,830,000. Not $30,831,33 as I have down here in the bottom portion of your screen in the note. So I'll get that corrected. My apologies on that. $480,000 of that would be fines and forfeitures. And the $750,000 would be the digital learning fund, which is not included in Fund 2. It's held at the county level. So with that said, we have $1.185 million in shortfall. Let's talk about some potential sources of revenue to help offset that shortfall. As you know, we are getting money from the federal government, which is going to flow directly from the state in what we call the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, which is part of the CARES Act. This is for K-12. A portion of that, we're having roughly $2 million. After the private schools get their share, we're required to give a portion of that money to the private schools in Moore County. So our amount after providing the private schools with their share will be approximately $1.8 million. We all know that the State General Assembly passed House Bill 1043, which the governor signed to provide additional funding. And what I have listed here are the specific pots that the General Assembly passed. You see, we school nutrition One of the criteria is to not replace lost revenue. It's very specific, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But we're receiving $515,000 there. We've talked about summer learning. This money in House Bill 1043 is unknown at this point. Our contract mental health portion is also unknown. There's non-digital remote instructional resources. We're waiting guidance on that. That amount is unknown. Digital devices for students, digital devices for staff. All these additional items we don't have guidance on, and we're waiting for guidance on the amounts for those specific items. Wi-Fi for buses, access points for remote learning, learning management platform, extended school year funding for exceptional children's area, and then their extended learning and integrated support, student support grants that can be applied for. So all those last items, we don't know the amounts that we're going to be given or how we can use it specifically in those areas. So what we do know is the total supplemental revenue at this point that we have been given is initial 2.315 million. 1.8 is very broad. 515,000 is very specific.
Mr. Cox, this is Dr. Brown. You referred to private schools. Don't you mean charter schools?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
I mean private schools. There are private schools that are operating in Moore County that the federal government has said that money is part of the CARES Act. We are required to give them a portion of that amount. I can't tell you what the formula is. I would have to defer to a man in our federal programs area. However, there's a formula, and we have to give a portion to the private schools, which will reduce our share down to $1.8 million.
Do we know how many private schools we're having to give to?
We know, I believe there are 11 private schools that operate in Moore County, and they are eligible for a portion of it, and we are considering or taking into consideration all those schools and their requests to give a portion of the money to them.
Okay. What about the charter schools?
The charter schools are separate from this. The amount that was given to us already takes into consideration the charter schools getting their portion of this money.
Which is consistent with how the state operates on all funding.
Right.
So HB 1043 is no different than all other state funding. Again, to make sure there's no confusion, whenever Mr. Cox and I are talking about charter school funding, we're talking about local dollars that go to charter schools. We don't get involved at all in state allocations to charters.
Correct, and that's done, like Dr. Grimacy said, that's done at the state level. They already take that off the top when they're considering how much they send directly to Moore County schools.
And Mr. Cox, go ahead, Mrs. Carter.
Just to clarify so that people don't look at this 2.3 million and say, well, look, you got plenty of money coming in. Why don't you use that to take care of the other expenses that have been outlined? This is one-time money. This is not money that's going to be directed to hire teachers to cut class sizes over a duration. It's not money that can be used to put our classified staff on a salary scale. It's not money that can hire the orchestra teacher to go to North Moore. It's money that's going to have much more specific one-time use than what our needs currently are.
That is correct. That is 100% correct. And I was going to address that on what we know and what we do not know here on this slide. So thank you for that. Yes, it is one-time funding.
And if I could interject just for a minute, because if I could have interjected before, I could have kept us from saying something confusing there. Could we go back a slide, Mr. Cox? Ms. Wallen-Miller, if you'll permit me, I just want to make this is Mr. Cox's presentation, but I'm part of it, so I want to make sure I get this out. Mr. Cox, we need to clarify the State Board of Education will be meeting on the 4th, this coming Thursday. Correct?
And yes, that is correct. And that's two slides later.
Yes, and we'll go ahead and clarify now to make sure that there's no confusion here. That there'll be, we hope their agenda will include their action on the allotments for HB 1043, this money that goes through the state to us. Are we waiting on that for this Thursday?
Yes, sir.
Okay, or we need state board approval of those allotments. And that's the reason for the question marks is.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so when that is approved, the breakdown of what we get from the state is going to be specific to those line items, and that it's really the 1.8 million where there is discretion. And that's where I wanted to make the statement I wanted to make before we answered Ms. Carter's question. That is discretionary. And yes, it could, Mrs. Carter, that money can be used for the orchestra teacher at Northmore, but it's only available for that 1 year and just that 1 year. So the board does have its discretion to use that for all of its fixed costs for the coming year, but every dollar of that money that's used for those fixed costs eventually is going to go away. And without any local dollars to support that, next year we'll be in no different position than we are now. Mr. Cox, is that an appropriate balance to what we just, or caveat to what we just said?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So forgive me for that. Ms. Wallen-Miller, we'll take a question before we go on. The next part of this is what we know and what we don't know.
Sure. The question that I had was just about the state funding, and what we'll be listening for, I suppose, on Thursday is, first of all, what the allotments will be for each of these categories. And if we cannot use a particular allotment, does that mean any of those funds get reverted back to the state?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay, and in my mind, I'm thinking, summer learning, we don't know yet exactly what that will look like. And so that could be something that would revert back if necessary.
That's correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Cox?
May I ask one other question real quickly before you left that last slide? The 515,000 that is going to cover school nutrition, will that cover our needs to continue with the summer nutrition program?
So this money is very specific as what it can be spent for in child nutrition. It cannot be used for anything that had previously been budgeted. It cannot be used for anything that will be reimbursed from the federal government. So essentially, this money cannot be used for our feeding program to continue from the end of school to June 30th.
It cannot be used.
The way the allotment policy was written, there is a question of how it can be used, and the guidance has been provided are essentially for supplies and materials for the school nutrition program, which is not food. And it can't be used for anything that would be reimbursed, which our summer program typically, a lot of the funding is reimbursed from the federal government through that summer feeding program. So it's not something that can be used for that the end of school through June 30th.
Thank you.
So what we do know and what we don't know, we do know we'll receive $1.8 million in the Elementary Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, which is the CARES money that flows directly to DPI, to us, after sharing with the private schools. That application was due today. It was submitted. Amanda submitted that last week, and we did receive approval last week. It was one of the fastest approvals from the Federal Programs Office at DPI that I think Amanda or anyone has seen. So we have received approval of our application for that money. We do anticipate receiving that money prior to June 30th. We don't know when we'll receive it, but we do expect it prior to June 30th. As Dr. Grimacy alluded to, for the most part, that money is unrestricted and can be used as to the desire of the board. However, we do stress that it is one-time money, that if it is used for personnel, we will be in the exact same situation we are next year without some additional sources of revenue. Guidance continues to come out on a weekly basis from the Department of Public Instruction on the uses and different things related to this money. We do know that it expires on September 30th, 2021. One thing we don't know, but we anticipate, will there be any subsequent reductions to federal funds or federal funding due to the COVID-19 and economic impact, just like we mentioned on the previous slide for the county allotment and guidance from DPI. We anticipate reductions from the state and potentially federal government because of the economic impact of COVID-19. So will there be any subsequent reductions to federal funds since this is federal funding that's coming to us? So to talk about the state COVID-19 money, the CARES Act money that was approved in House Bill 1043, the allotment policy for school nutrition funding was approved at the State Board of Education on May 21st, their emergency meeting. They said specifically it cannot be used to replace lost revenues. As I mentioned, there are questions around how it truly can be spent. That's officers and child nutrition directors have been asking. We both have met with school nutrition staff and have gotten limited guidance on that. The one thing that I do want to stress and point out, that money does end on June 30th, 2020. We have asked for the General Assembly to take this up to give us till September 30th to spend the money, to give us time, if it is for equipment or things that could benefit the school nutrition area on change that may be needed when school starts back. For example, feeding students in classrooms or whatever may be needed. Most suppliers are now out of stocking items, and we can't get those items prior to June 30th. And as part of state law, we can't pay for anything that we do not have in hand prior to receiving it. So if we order it and we don't receive it by June 30th, we can't truly pay for it. So we've asked for the General Assembly to give us some flexibility if they don't open up the uses of it, to at least give us a little more time to get it spent, give the supply chain a chance to open up to meet some of those needs. And the last point that I have here, many districts are anticipating reverting a large portion just because of the narrow scope of how we can use that money and the guidance that we've been given from DPI, school nutrition, and the federal government related to that money. The other portions of the state COVID-19 money approved in House Bill 1043, as I mentioned, it's very specific pots. It's summer learning, it's contracted mental health, it's digital devices for students, digital devices for staff, Wi-Fi for buses, access points, and several other areas. It has to be tied to those specific areas. At this point, we don't know what the allotment policy is. We don't know what our allotment amounts are. And as Dr. Grimacy mentioned, the State Board of Education is scheduled to hear and take action on all those items at their meeting this week. They kind of have a work session on Thursday and on Wednesday the 3rd, but then actually take action on June 4th. So we're hoping to get more guidance after that on these specific pots, our amounts, and how we can use those monies. And I'll re-emphasize here, we don't know, will there be subsequent state and or federal reductions in funding that these monies, the direct money coming from DPI, from the CARES Act, as well as the state money that's flowing from the General Assembly will need to offset. One thing that I had on the previous slide, the state COVID-19 monies, based on the way the CARES Act was written, expire on December 31, 2020. So we only have 6 months to spend that money whenever we do get the allotment policy and the allotment amounts, where the the K-12 Emergency Relief Fund flowing from DPI, we do have till September 30th, 2021 to spend those funds.
Hey, Andrew, I'm sorry. This is Stacy. I got just a little confused. You were talking about money that's being expired by June 30th?
Yes, so the school nutrition money piece that the General Assembly approved in House Bill 1043, the one that the State Board took up on May 21st.
That's the $500,000.
$515,000
expires June 30th. So
I don't mean to interrupt you again, but is there any way to maybe add that to that bullet? Just, it gets kind of confusing with things getting expired. I mean, in my point of view, but I wouldn't mind if something was maybe added to that saying that it expires at a certain time.
Go back to the chart.
Yeah, I can add it to this narrative, but yes, I have it here on this chart. The school nutrition money expires June 30th.
No, it's there.
There it is. Okay.
I probably didn't cover that as well as I should have on that.
No, it's okay. I see it now. Thank you.
So that's what we do, and what we do know and what we do not know based on the emergency relief K-12 money coming through DPI and the state COVID money that will be coming to us in House Bill 1043. So where do we go from here? Just to summarize, the fixed cost items that we have been revised down to $865,000. See each item there. We have remaining consolidation costs that we have to cover of $320,000. And then the board's desire for the highest priority needs, the classified salary schedule, restoring teachers for targeted grades 4 through 5 class size reduction at $1.4 million. So happy to take questions, have further discussion on how you'd like for us to proceed from here. Based on the county's proposed budget and what we do and what we don't know, alternative sources of revenue.
And if I could add a closing comment to
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Cox, can you please go back to the slide that displayed what the total anticipated local funding here? No, keep going. One more. Right there. Nope. Yeah, you went by it. Go back. Okay. Yeah, right there, please. Thank you. Stop right there. All right.
Okay.
So the anticipated local funding for next year is $30,830,000. As it has been stated publicly, you as a school board have complete freedom on how to allocate the $30,830,000. And that is a true statement. You have complete freedom under the law to allocate that funding. What I would add to that, just to make sure that everybody fully understands, is that from a standpoint of your responsibility, you have no choice but to include your increased fixed costs in that $30,830,000. So if in fact your local revenues are going to be $30,830,000, as you exercise all this freedom that you have no choice but to include your fixed costs. That is your fiscal responsibility. The school board has two primary responsibilities. One is to affix the budget for the school district, and the other one is to approve policies. Those are your, to get there, you hire a superintendent, you hire other people to do that, you hold us accountable. But ultimately, under the law, you must approve a budget and you've got to establish policy. And so you have freedom to spend $30,830,000. If we go to the next slide, Andrew, go down a few here to get to your fixed cost summary. No, go back up one. I think it's the one prior to this. Up, there you go. Your bottom line is that you have no choice. You have freedom to spend the $30,830,000, but you have no choice but to include in that freedom how you're going to cover new costs of $1,185,000, and do so with money that either by cutting your current expenses related to your current level of services, or to take a risk on one-time money from the federal government that's coming that may assist with a lot of this expense. But knowing that a year from now we'll be right back where we started from on the current level of services. That's what's ahead for us. The staff comes with no recommendations today because there's going to be a lot that's clarified this week. We hope that the State Board of Education will act on the allotments under HB 1043 and that by this time next week we'll know more. Now, just because the state board acts on Thursday, Andrew, we may or may not get those allotments from DPI in time for next Monday's meeting. So it really depends on how quickly they get that out after the state board acts. Generally, they're pretty good about that. So we look forward to getting that. The other thing, the other wild card that's not mentioned anywhere in Mr. Cox's presentation is that the Department of Health and Human Services will be briefing school board superintendents this week on what the Department of Health and Human Services requirements are going to be for social distancing and group gatherings as we seek to reopen schools this fall. What those requirements are could have a tremendous impact on our costs for next year. If we are to maintain social distancing on school buses, and hypothetically, if all the children were to come to school on this same day at the same time, we would need close to 400 more school buses and bus drivers in order to accommodate that. So obviously, we're going to have to be looking at some very unique models of educating our children if we're going to employ 6 feet of social distancing between everybody, just as it pertains to transportation. For the standard 720 square foot classroom, the greatest capacity for that room, if we respect social distancing, would be 19 children. And as you know, our pupil teacher ratios in grades 4 and up all greatly exceed that amount. And so that itself would introduce a lot of new cost. So we can't forget that the CARES Act funding that's coming directly to the school district is also intended to help cover these other unanticipated costs related to how we manage schools within the appropriate restrictions that are going to be released by the Department of Health and Human Services. None of those decisions were made up until now because we really are not in a position to execute any of the hypothetical plans that we've put together, that our reentry committee has put together. We've not been able to execute any of those or say this is what we intend to do until we know what those requirements and what that guidance is going to tell us. And we won't know that until later this week. So before we even assume that any of this 1.8 million can be used to cover the local expenses that have not been afforded to us by the county commissioners, we have to look at what's not going to be covered by the state. We have to look at what's not going to be covered by the feds, and we got to find out what's going to be expected by the Department of Health and Human Services. So this week is going to be a big week. We hope to get a lot of information from Health and Human Services about what our costs are going to be when we reopen. And we hope to find out from the state board what our actual allotments are going to be from 1043. And then at some point, we may have to take some risks. We're going to have to move forward with some sort of a budget, depending upon what the General Assembly ends up with by the end of June in its short session. And as far as what the federal government doesn't fund, some of that we're not going to know until later in the summer. Again, Andrew, I'll defer to you. You're nodding your head yes. Is there anything there that you need to clarify that I might have confused?
No, the only thing they're saying, the one additional thing is we've got to take into consideration the cost cuts from the federal government, and not cost cuts, funding cuts from the federal government and state as well.
And that would be in Title I or in Perkins, in any of our other traditional federal funding areas. On one hand, we're getting 1.8 million from the CARES Act, but we still don't know. We've been advised to prepare for reductions in other federal funding areas. So before anybody just assumes that we can do a happy dance over this $1.8 million, we need to see first what the federal government's going to take away. We need to cover that cost. We need to cover any shortfalls that come from state funding, knowing what the revenue projections are for the state. And then, of course, we now know that not only do we not have the same level of funding that we had from the county commissioners in the past year, we're actually going to be reduced by $738,000. Well, yeah, $738,000. We're going to have to cover the lingering expenses associated with the fact that we need to operate both of the Southern Pine schools for at least half of the year. So with that, concluding remark, somber as it may be, it is the truth. And we're happy to answer any questions or take any feedback from board members.
This is, I'm sorry. I was going to say, this is Stacy. Andrew, I had a question. We have those built-in calendar days, and Dr. Bob, this might even be a question for you. We have those built-in calendar days for stay at home where the kids learn online. Have we considered into how much that's going to cost us as board members or our county for children who don't have internet in the elementary schools and children who don't have computers?
Mr. Cox?
So right now, the state board, I think it's the state board, and I'm not sure which division, has asked us to inquire to the needs of each school district. And I think that's going to shape the school board, the State Board of Education's response to devices, how we can use those allotment to potentially help those students. But we have provided hotspots and different things, as been mentioned in previous COVID-19 related management updates to the board. We're doing some of those things. I don't have an exact cost at this point on how much that would be, but that is something.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, right, but this is for everybody. So this is not just for high school, or, I mean, this would be for every child has to have something at home to learn from.
That's correct.
I didn't know if we just didn't have, we haven't even thought about how much that's going to cost us.
Oh, yes, we have, ma'am. Let
Well,
me,
I mean, in here,
no, we actually have a lot of information. What Mr. Cox is hearing the question, but he's answering a different question. What we know is that children in K through 5 have not been assigned Chromebooks.
Right.
So that is the largest portion of our population that does not have connectivity to online learning, because we aren't even doing online learning in our schools. And so that is why for 5 years, we have requested that the commissioners expand on the money that they set aside for digital learning to increase that from $750,000 a year to $1.2 million a year, because that would then put a Chromebook in the hand of every 3rd, 4th, and 5th grader, and also add the appropriate IT support and media tech assistance and digital integration facilitation that would support that. Now that would get us grades 3, 4, and 5. There will be money that could buy Chromebooks. We can go out and buy them, but we will not be able to lease them, because this is one-time money, and all of it would have to be front-loaded. So we could buy many Chromebooks, distribute them to students, and then 3 or 4 years from now, as they begin to age out and they're no longer able to do the work that's needed at that time, then there will be no reoccurring revenues to replace them. And so that's a dilemma that we still are going to need to wrestle with on that very large portion of our children that don't have that connectivity. Now, for K through 2, it's not necessarily appropriate that they all just be given a Chromebook and assume that everything's going to be fine. So we have to think through what's an appropriate way to communicate for our youngest children. It could involve Chromebooks or not. The bottom line is that no matter how many Chromebooks or laptops, whatever it is we purchase, it's going to be one-time purchase only. It's not sustainable. We don't have the money to hire the IT support to make it work. And in the end, none of this addresses the need of a large block of our students who live in the northernmost part of our county and in the western and easternmost parts of our county, where the issue is not Chromebooks or hotspots, it's cell towers. And nobody nobody is talking about government infrastructure when it comes to broadband. And so everybody is skipping that topic. We are not being given enough money to put cell towers and bring broadband access to our children that live in the outer rim of our county. And so when we look at the data of the children that are participating, we've got these layers. And in each one of those cases, Mrs. Caldwell, we're going to have some difficult decisions that we have to make. There's a fair amount of money here. It's not enough. And what we do have is one-time money only. And what we don't know, that Mr. Cox has laid out so appropriately, is that we don't know that those sources that are giving us the money are also talking about cutting our broader budget that we receive. So we have to be thoughtful about how quickly we make promises with all this money that everybody's looking at and getting so excited about. My advice is that everybody just needs to move slowly and thoughtfully, because there's a lot of moving parts that are going on right now. And we're in a very precarious situation. We have fixed cost increases, local cost increases, and we do not have revenue to cover it. So we are already looking at reducing cost, which means since 80% or so of our budget is into personnel, that it's very unlikely that we can get there without looking at a reduction in personnel or the salaries and benefits that we offer to people.
And I'd offer that our salaries and benefits are closer to 90% of the budget.
And I think my point, my question, and thank you, Dr. Bob, was just we can't rely on that 1.8 for our budget, because it could go to something that we need other than what's in our budget now that we're missing. One
way or another, we're going to spend that $1.8 million. The question is, how do we do that?
Right.
And so we have an equivalent amount of fixed cost increases, and we could invest it there. But we have to be mindful of what these other unknown costs are going to be, which are going to be coming soon.
Right. Thank you.
Am I wrong? This is John Weaver. Am I wrong in stating that each LEA has to develop a remote learning plan by sometime in July? Is that not correct?
July 20th, Mr. Weaver.
July 20th. And will that cover all the aspects of online learning, the equipment, the how it will be presented?
The legislation, the legislation lays out 8 categories that we have to report on how we're going to meet those. I don't have those in front of me right now, but the State Board of Education added 2 more, so we're up to 10. But one of the 2 that the State Board added at its most recent emergency meeting was, what are the limitations that confront your remote learning plan? And I applaud the State Board for adding that one. Because up until that point, the legislation read as though there was some expectation that magically we were going to be able to offer educational services to our children remotely that somehow met or exceeded what we would do if all the children were in school. And clearly, as proud as we are of the remote learning that we've been able to engage in these last few months, there are definitely deficiencies that can only be remedied when we get all the children back in school. We are not structured to provide remote learning, and nor do I happen to believe that remote learning in and of itself is sufficient. Even homeschoolers that use remote learning, their parents are very actively involved in getting them in firsthand experiences with museums, getting out in the wilderness and seeing practical applications of learning. Those are the situations that you look at that inform what's effective remote learning. And so I think our teachers have done a fantastic job of closing that gap as much as possible, but there are some serious limitations that can only be remedied by rethinking the infrastructure. And that starts at the top with the federal and state governments. That's not just something that you remedy by being lucky and having a mobile tech company that's going to give you a bunch of money that sets things up for you, but not the neighboring counties.
And this is Pam, and just to add to what you're saying, Dr. Grimacy, the guidelines coming down from the state may or may not align with what the guidelines may be from the Department of Health and Human Services for reentry for our students. You had said, Dr. Grimacy, that if we have to continue to do social distancing, that we will have to look at additional buses. That means more bus drivers. We will have to look at classroom size, which probably 77 classes that we have right now are of more than 30 students. So we don't know exactly what the cost is now for what that reentry looks like, or do we?
Those examples are illustrative in nature. I think clearly everybody knows that the state is in no position to buy that many school buses for all jurisdictions. I think if, in fact, social distancing requirements are applied to school buses, we're going to have to look at some significant modification in the school day, because we won't be able to bring all the children to school at the same time and take them home at the same time. So a lot of our parents that are very hopeful that school this fall will look exactly the way that it looked before March 14th of this year. They need to be paying attention to what these requirements are going to be. They won't be options. We're going to have to comply with certain requirements. I don't pretend to know what those are, but I've been watching other states and other countries, and just doing my best to try to predict what that is. That's what we've been doing with our own reentry process. We have no control over some of these things, so we have to look at multiple options and come up with multiple plans and try to guess what it's going to be, so that we're as ready as we can be. But Ms. Thompson, what you point out is if social distancing is a requirement, or if there are restrictions on large group gatherings, then it's either going to impact what our costs are, and we're going to need that money from some other source because clearly we don't have it, or it's going to impact what the school day looks like going forward. We hope that within the next week to two that we'll get the kind of guidance we need to be able to start answering those questions for the public.
Thank you. And I really wanted to make that point clear for our audience, Dr. Grimacy. Just so that everybody understands what reentry may or may not look like, and there probably will be additional costs associated in some type of manner. Thank you.
Yeah, we are just as anxious to get that guidance as a lot of our parents are to hear from us what exactly we're going to do. But our group has worked hard. We have lots of variables and lots of options that we can plug from, but we've not been able to make any decisions until we know what the playing field is going to be, and only the state can define that for us.
Dr. Grimacy, when I look at this slide, and I find this slide very helpful, I'm thinking sort of historically about where our local funding has been used. You know, if I recall, it's only been in the last 2 years that our state funding has actually caught up to what we had before the Great Recession in 2008. And so if you look back to 2008 and our local expense and our charter school expense, even back then, our local amount that we would get from the county was about 25 million in 2008. And it stayed at 25 million for approximately 7 years, if I'm correct. It didn't really increase very much, even though our student population increased, probably close to 500 students. And our local expense for charter schools during that time went from 500,000 to the number that you see here now, which is 2.5 million. So there has been a tremendous growth in those costs, in addition to the fact that there's just been a lot of growth in costs for our staff, for benefits, and just, you know, being able to keep the lights on, right? And being able to pay our staff. During that same period of time, we also lost, the state gave us less teachers, allotted us less teachers during that time. So we had to turn our county funding from towards paying for teachers. So we lost about, I think, 50 or 60 teachers
30.
on the state from the state level, and then we had to turn that. We had to use state local funding to pay for that. So, you know, there's just not a lot of flexibility. I think my bottom line is there's not a lot of flexibility in our county funding because of the way the allotment schedule works from the state level and the level of service that our students and our parents expect and honestly need. And then during that same time, we also cut a lot, if I recall. You know, I've made a list, and I know I've said it before, but we cut programs in year-round, in Spanish immersion, we cut TAs, textbooks were cut, we cut 20% of central services staff, we cut buses and made them more efficient. So there was a lot of trimming and cutting all throughout the past at least 5 or 6 years that I've been on the board. You know, and you're right when you say there's nothing left really, except for as you say, personnel is really where that would have to happen if we don't have the funding that we need. And that's, I think it's just important to keep that context in our heads as we consider this as well, that there have been already much that we have considered over the past several years, and if we go to the level of staffing, that, you know, looking at staffing, that would be a concern to me.
We will have to rest with what the state requires us to provide in terms of staffing. And since we're ranked, I believe the last ranking was 108th in the state in state investment per pupil, you know, it would be whatever number of teachers the state gives us, and understand that every locally funded position then is at risk. Let me add, Ms. Wallen-Miller, as you well remember, this school district for about a 4 or 5 year period of time drew generously from what was then a substantial fund balance, and so did not make requests to the county commissioners for additional local funding, but instead drew from its fund balance. And when I arrived, I saw that it was quite alarmed with the rate. We were thinking, drawing about, I think it was like 1.7 million per year from the fund balance, and it was depleting rapidly. So we made some difficult decisions back in 2014, 15, and 15, 16 to put the brakes on that, and then divorced ourselves from dependence on fund balance through some one-time money that the county gave us on a number of different levels, which, you know, we had hoped that maybe would become reoccurring funding, but has not. Andrew, if you could go back to your first slide. Right there. As we can see, it was during that time where where the fund balance was running out that the county provided us with additional funds in 17, 18. There were a lot of citizens that provided feedback, and we're very concerned that if we just outright cut over $1 million from the budget in order to finish the process of weaning ourselves off the fund balance, then it would have impacts that were unacceptable to the public. And you can see where we got a lot of assistance there for the last couple of years, some of which involved the opening of McDeeds Creek Elementary School. But now that we are coming out of that period of time, if you look at what our level of funding is, it's from the county, it's going to be right in line with where we were in 2017, 18. As we finished our dependence on fund balance. And it would appear as though that with or without COVID-19, we may be looking at a new philosophy on the part of county government that operational expenses are going to be flatlined, and the school board's just going to be told you have freedom to make that decision as to how to spend that level of money.
One other thing that I would add is when I was looking back at some of this data from 2008, our state rank in 2008 was 91st. And if you compared ourselves to the average school district, we were below the average school district by about $136 per student. Now we're at 108th out of the state, out of 115. And we are below the average state per pupil expenditure by $337. Doesn't sound like a lot per person, but when you multiply that out by our number of students, it's over $4 million that we are not getting that maybe an average school district is. And that's a lot to make up on our own.
And as much as we know how important it is and how much we appreciate the new facilities that we're getting and the recent allocation that will allow us to get caught up on some maintenance that we have not had the money to address for many years, to assume that new facilities alone will make things right is to overlook the importance of investing in our people who work directly with our children. So we need to have the quality facilities, but we cannot forget the operational expenses and making sure that our classified employees have subsistence wages and that our certified employees receive wages that are competitive enough to keep them here and keep them from going to other school districts. Any other questions or feedback from board members?
Just to get this straight, and like I said, I want people watching to understand, we're looking, and if we go back to, Mr. Cox, can you go to your next slide? I believe it is, or maybe it's 2 from here. Keep going, where you actually show the one more. Maybe. Okay, give me one more. Right there, where you have the 1.18 in fixed costs. We have to find a way to cut that amount out of what had been current expenditures from this past year in order to meet this budget. So we're going to be working with starting at about 27.8 million is the number that we'd be working from, and I got that off, I guess, the next slide.
That's correct, Ms.
So
Madam
we're
Chair.
looking at 27.8 million and figuring out a way to cut 1.18 out of it.
Yes, ma'am.
Just to meet our fixed needs, and not to add anything, not to be able to even meet the other priority needs. And in the process have to eliminate something that we've been offering.
Actually, I would say it comes out of the 30,830,000, Madam Chair, because that 1.185 million includes charter school expense.
Does it?
So,
Right.
yeah, so you'd have to look at the total picture, but the answer is correct. The bottom line is the bottom line. 1.185 is our current projection on fixed cost increases, and if there is not a revenue increase that matches that, then as you exercise your total freedom for how to spend your $30,830,000, you have no choice. You do not have freedom about the $1.185 million. You will find a way to cover that. And your options as of now are cutting existing expense to accommodate that, or taking a risk with the federal funding you're going to get, that A, you have that money and you're not going to lose it when the state or the feds cut something else, and B, that you're going to be making those fixed cost increases are all reoccurring expense. So any commitment you make with the federal dollars will be only a one-year commitment. So any expense you take on with those federal dollars will accommodate 1 year, but no more.
All right. Thank you. Other questions or comments or lots of concerns?
I just want to clarify that the capital expense, the digital learning, and the local expense, do we have any local expense for charter schools? Do we have any flexibility there?
In what respect, Mrs. Wallmiller?
Are those costs fixed? Do we have to spend those?
The charter school expenses, by statute, we must, as you well know, that money, whatever the number of charter school children is, times whatever that local expense rate is, we are mandated to pay that to the charters. That is the local money that is due them, and which I don't have any concern with as long as there is some shared accountability with that expense, and that it's not just up to the school board to exercise its complete freedom to cut its budget. So Beyond that, I don't know how to answer your question. Digital learning is very nominal at best. It covers only grades 6 through 12. There's been no growth in it. It's stayed the same the last 6 years. I think Kent Eklund and Tim Locklear and Mike Metcalf and Steve Johnson have done a great job of stretching those dollars and getting a lot of bang for the buck, but that hasn't grown. Capital expense has been supplemented on occasion by the commissioners, but there is nothing there that allows us to plan strategically. It's just sort of, we go year by year or every other year. We go through a lot of process to get some sort of an outlay and do the best we can with what we get. The charter school expense is fixed. So yeah, in that respect, we get down to local expense. Beyond that, 27,825 is it. But I just want to make sure that we were accurate that if you include charter school fixed expense, then you got to look at the 30,830 instead of the 27,825.
And I will add in there that the 750 capital expense is a line item that they give specifically for capital expense. And the digital learning 750,000 is a line item that they set up on their books for us to spend. So any flexibility that we would have to go back to the board and request them to allow us additional use for that outside of the capital expense or digital learning.
Well, and I'd like to add too, our local charter schools, our public charter schools should be equally concerned about this budget, because by these projections, they're losing $375,000 because the county subsidy is down. So charter schools should have some equal concern about the funding that the county government is not providing.
Your statement about the money is accurate. I can't comment on what concerns them or doesn't concern them, but your statement is accurate. Based on a reduction in what we project, it would be our local contribution for the coming year. The amount per pupil that we pass on to the charters will in fact decrease.
Mr. Cox, this is John Weaver. I have a question about the school business system modernization mandate that you showed a $10,000 reduction.
Yes,
in
sir.
The revised budget. What accounted for that $10,000 reduction?
So by us committing to our current company for 3, 4, or 5 years, they will reduce their annual cost. They switch their fee from a set fee to a per ADM fee, which the new systems that we will have the option to choose from have done. So our cost essentially doubled. But they said, if you sign a 3, 4, 5 year agreement with us while you're choosing which system you go to, we will reduce your per ADM cost by a certain amount, which will increase this by $40,000 instead of the $50,000 we had anticipated.
All right, thank you.
All right, are there additional questions for Mr. Cox or for Dr. Gramercy about the budget? Then I guess we might point out that there is a public hearing on the budget. I believe it's scheduled for Tuesday, June 16th. I think it's a 10:30 a.m. meeting. Because of the social distancing, it's obviously going to be a online meeting, but they are expecting to hear from those concerning the budget, any local citizens who would like to speak out in favor of or against the budget as presented. You can call in to the commissioners meeting at 910-947-6403. I believe you have to call earlier and be tagged into them, or you can send your comments by email to clerk-to-board, CLERKTOBOARD @moorecountync.gov, and those comments will be read for you at the commissioner's hearing. But this would be a time to speak out and let the commissioners know how you want your tax money to be used. So again,
Madam Chair, may I tag on to that just a second?
Yes,
They're really looking for input. I mean, they really want it, and not only for the meeting, but I don't say if they want input, you can do that by emails to the commissioners also. And I think the more the emails they get, the more they'll understand what's going on.
So now's the time to be heard. Again, that's
And Libby, they can find that on their site too as well if they didn't write it down just now.
That is correct.
Okay.
If you go to the moorecounty.nc.gov website, the commissioners' meetings are outlined and how to send in your comments.
And we also need to be talking, people need to let our state legislators know that we need to keep the funding going for the teachers and the buses and all the different pieces. They're making requirements of us, but we're not able to keep them if we don't have the money.
Well, and another thing they need to know in Raleigh, both through DPI and the state board, and as well as our General Assembly, is that processes within the schools don't happen overnight. And as wonderful as it was for Governor Cooper to announce we would be continuing on with school on one day and then to close us all down the next, the schools really stepped up and have accomplished some great things in the process. But in planning for this coming fall and possibly even years ahead with changes to our routine school days and the possibility of remote learning days and even remote learning weeks, those things don't happen overnight. So the longer that things drag on in Raleigh, the more difficult it is for our schools to make the plans that we really need to put into action. So,
absolutely.
Any encouragement we can give them to go on and make decisions in Raleigh and let us know what's going to happen would be appreciated all the way down. Mr. Dennison and Dr. Brown, with your input in Raleigh, with your legislative activities, we sure do appreciate you speaking up on our behalf. All right, this time, then we can move on to board comments. And so going back in alphabetical order, that means I'm back to Dr. Brown.
As we end this definitely unusual school year, I want to thank our teachers, our students, our staff and administration for a wonderful, although very different school year. I hope that our community and school community will stay safe throughout the summer. We look forward to welcoming everyone back in August. Social distance, remote, however we are determined to do. Also, congratulations to our 2020 high school graduates and our retirees that we will honor tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Ms. Caldwell, comments?
I think I need to just say, Dr. Brown, when you say your speech, you just need to say, everyone says, because that's pretty much what I was going to say as well. I just wanted to congratulate everyone graduating, whether it's 5th grade, 8th grade, moving on, or 12th grade, of course. This week is going to be a very busy week. Excited. I'm excited to see what it has in store and go to the graduations as much as we can and just enjoy it. I just wanted to enjoy this week, and I'm hoping the kids just inhale it and enjoy it. So,
thank you, Mr. Dennison.
No comment.
And I'm sure we'll see you at some of those graduations. Ms. Thompson.
I'm trying to be a good boy and not get myself in trouble.
Ms. Thompson.
First, I would just like to say, as I'm sure all of us are, just extremely disappointed with where we ended up with our budget and our shortfall with our priority of classified salary scale as well as additional teachers. It's a challenge, obviously, for us to try to go back and pick and choose other areas to where we would have to look at cutting to come up with these funds. So hopefully we will hear from some of our supporters from the county to advocate for that funding so that we can provide much needed salary increases for our support team and additional teachers. Also, in addition to the congratulations for the 2020 seniors and retirees, I would like to just comment on and congratulate schools that were recognized for the 2020 Purple Star Award, and we saw that was listed in our paper. So kudos and congratulations to those schools. Also, congratulations to Pinckney principal staff for them finishing up our house that we're going to dedicate in a couple of weeks. That is just phenomenal, the work that they did to finalize the house. And lastly, but certainly not least, I just want to extend congratulations to Dr. Bob for being selected as a regional finalist for the A. Craig Phillips, North Carolina Superintendent of the Year for 2020 award. He is one of 8 finalists out of 115 superintendents. So congratulations to him just for his ongoing leadership throughout the year, not only, but definitely through our transition with this COVID-19 pandemic. Extremely well deserving to Dr. Bob. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Wallen-Miller.
It's always hard being the W's, being towards the end, but so I will say thank you to the board members who made their comments. I agree with all of them. And I would also add that the immediate flip to online learning was really impressive for our county, especially as I reflect on and hear what has happened in other states and other counties. As a board member, I'm absolutely grateful that all of our 6th to 12th graders have access to Chromebooks, and our secondary students were already used to using Google Classroom to make that transition that much easier. Our elementary families did grow accustomed to picking up learning packets and completing the learning activities that way. Well, I would say that it was what was less smooth from our year or our end of the year was ensuring that all of our students had access to digital connectivity. And also the supports at home. You know, there were many students and parents who were learning to co-work together, including my own family. You were learning to manage time, learning to engage when the teachers were not right in front of you, and I know how difficult that was. As a working parent myself with 2 middle schoolers at home, I can tell you that the situation was not ideal. And what I learned during this time was that our teachers, as we should all know, are just exceptional. That they are able in the classroom, when they're in the classroom, to engage and find ways to inspire and hold our students accountable, and they challenge them, and they really bring out the best in our students. And they did the same thing online, but it was not the same. And I echo your comments earlier today, Dr. Rimisi, that it is not the ideal way for us to be learning, but I appreciate all the efforts that went into it. I also am hearing from a lot of parents that they have many questions about what next year will look like. And as you heard from today's conversation, there will be a lot that we're going to learn this week just from the State Board of Education and from DPI and also from our federal partners. And I know we all want it to be back to normal. We're all looking forward to August. We're all hoping for some normalcy. And I just ask for everybody's patience as we kind of navigate the next few weeks and things become more clear about what the fall will look like. I am like you, am hoping that everybody goes back to school because I know that that is what's best for kids, but also know that the students and the staff will do all that they can to ensure that our new school year goes off to the best of our ability and without any hitches. So thank you to the staff and to the parents and to the students who've all just rallied over these last few weeks. And we're all looking forward to Friday when we can just take a breather for the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Weaver.
I'd like to express my appreciation to all those who prepared and presented the information provided during our work session today. It is unfortunate and disappointing to me that we may have to lower our expectations from the original budget that we presented to our commissioners. The circumstances that brought us to this point will make the coming year very challenging for all of us. On a positive note, we can all look forward to celebrating graduation for the class of 2020. Thank you.
All right, well, I think that's been about enough. We do congratulate those who will be leaving us and welcome the retirees to the good life as they will be coming through tomorrow. But at this point, I think that enough has been said. So, Mr. Dennison, would you like
Madam
to?
Chair, I
Yes,
move
sir.
the meeting be adjourned.
Second, Dr. Brown.
The motion has been made by Mr. Dennison and seconded by Dr. Brown. All those in favor, I think we can do a single vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All right, it carries unanimously 7-0. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you. It was good to see you all.
Thank you.